The shotgun blast shattered the frozen Montana night. Lydia Morin, 8 months pregnant, barefoot, trembling, stood at the top of the stairs with a weapon she barely knew how to hold. Below, 3 armed rustlers circled her husband. One wrong move and everything she'd built from nothing would burn. But that moment was still months away. This story begins differently, with a woman in rags stepping off a train and a broken man who'd forgotten how to hope. Stay with me until the end and comment your city below. Let's see how far this story travels across the world. The November wind cut through Lydia Morin's threadbare dress like 1,000 tiny knives, each gust a reminder that she had made a terrible mistake. She stood on the wooden platform of Sweetwater Station, Montana Territory, watching the train that had carried her west disappear into the gray distance, its whistle fading into nothing. Around her, families reunited with shouts of joy. Men in fine coats helped ladies in finer dresses into waiting carriages. Children ran in circles, their laughter bright against the cold afternoon. And Lydia stood alone. Her carpet bag, if you could even call it that, was little more than a flour sack tied with rope. Inside, one spare chemise with more holes than fabric, a tortoiseshell comb missing half its teeth, and a tarnished locket she couldn't bring herself to open. Everything else she'd owned in Philadelphia had been sold, stolen, or left behind in her desperate flight west. The dress she wore had once been blue. Now it was the color of ash and exhaustion, patched so many times the original fabric was barely visible. Her boots, men's boots, too large, found in an alley, were tied with strips of cloth to keep them from falling off her feet. She was 26 years old, and she looked like a ghost. "Ma'am?" Lydia turned to find the station master, a portly man with kind eyes and a magnificent mustache, studying her with concern. "Ma'am, do you have someone meeting you?" She opened her mouth, but her throat was too dry. She'd had nothing to eat or drink since yesterday morning, when a preacher's wife in Billings had taken pity on her and offered bread. Her voice came out as a croak. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I'm here about the position." "Position?" The station master frowned. "What position would that be?" The advertisement." Lydia fumbled in her pocket and pulled out a crumpled newspaper clipping, the paper soft from being folded and unfolded 100 times. "Housekeeper wanted, room and board provided. Montana Territory." The station master took the clipping, squinted at it, then his face fell. "Oh dear, ma'am, this advertisement is nearly 6 months old. I'm afraid that position was filled long ago." The world tilted. Lydia had spent her last dollar on the train ticket from Billings to Sweetwater. She had no money for food, no money for lodging, no money to go back. Not that there was anywhere to go back to. Philadelphia meant David's debts, David's creditors, David's fury, David's fists. She'd escaped one prison only to find herself in another. "I see." Her voice sounded calm, which was strange because inside she was screaming. "Thank you for your time." She picked up her flour sack bag and walked toward the edge of the platform, her oversized boots shuffling against the wood. The main street of Sweetwater stretched before her, a muddy ribbon lined with false-fronted buildings, a general store, a saloon, a church with a white steeple, and beyond that, nothing but endless prairie and mountains that looked like they could swallow a person whole. Behind her, she heard the station master talking to someone in low, urgent tones. "Just arrived. Looks half-starved. Nowhere to go." Lydia kept walking. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford, but she had just enough left to keep her spine straight and her head up as she descended the platform steps. The street was a river of mud from recent rain. Her first step sank to her ankle. She pulled her foot free with a sucking sound, and someone laughed, a harsh female laugh that made Lydia's cheeks burn. "Lord have mercy, Tom. Look at that." "Hush, Miriam, that's unkind. I'm just saying what we're all thinking. She looks like something the cat dragged in and the dog wouldn't eat." More laughter. Lydia fixed her eyes forward and kept walking. She'd heard worse in Philadelphia. Words couldn't hurt you if you didn't let them in. She made it to the general store before her vision started to darken at the edges. The last thing she remembered was reaching for the hitching post, missing it, and then the world went black. Jonas Hale was loading fence posts into his wagon when he heard the commotion. "Someone get Doc Brennan! She just collapsed right there." Poor thing looks like she hasn't eaten in a week." He looked up to see a crowd forming outside Callahan's general store. Against his better judgment, he had a ranch to run, cattle to feed, and a nephew waiting at home. Jonas tied off the last fence post and walked toward the crowd. People parted when they saw him coming. They always did. At 6'3", with shoulders like an ox and hands that could break a man's jaw, Jonas Hale commanded a certain respect in Sweetwater. It helped that he rarely smiled, rarely spoke, and had a reputation for being harder than the Montana winter. In the center of the crowd, a woman lay crumpled on the boardwalk. Jonas crouched beside her, his knees protesting. He was only 34, but some days he felt twice that. The woman was impossibly thin, her face pale as milk except for 2 bright spots of fever on her cheeks. Her dress was more patches than fabric, and her hands were what made Jonas pause. They were a lady's hands, long-fingered, elegant, despite the calluses and cuts. These were hands that had once held teacups and piano keys before they'd learned to scrub and work. These were hands that told a story of a life that had gone terribly, terribly wrong. "Jonas." Doc Brennan pushed through the crowd, his black bag in hand. He was a wizened man of 60 with sharp eyes and sharper opinions. "What have we got?" "Collapsed. Looks like starvation and exposure." Doc Brennan knelt on the woman's other side, checking her pulse, lifting her eyelids. "How long has she been out?" "Just happened," someone called out. "She got off the noon train." "Did she come alone?" "All alone," Miriam Price said, her voice dripping with implication. She was the mayor's wife and the town's most dedicated gossip. "Not a soul meeting her, dressed like a beggar. I'd bet my Sunday hat she's running from something." "Or someone," her friend added in a stage whisper. Jonas felt his jaw tighten. He'd been on the receiving end of Sweetwater's gossip after Sarah died. He knew exactly how cruel small-town kindness could be. "She needs rest, food, and warmth," Doc Brennan announced. "Someone fetch Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house." "The boarding house is full up," someone said. "Cattle buyers in town for the auction." "Well, she can't stay here in the street." An uncomfortable silence fell. Jonas watched as people found sudden interest in their boots, the sky, anywhere but the woman lying unconscious on the boardwalk. "I'll take her." The words were out before Jonas could stop them. Every head swiveled toward him. "You?" Miriam Price's eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared into her bonnet. "Jonas Hale, you can't possibly, Doc, can she be moved?" Doc Brennan studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Gently. Keep her warm. I'll follow you out to the ranch. Make sure she's settled." Jonas didn't wait for more objections. He scooped the woman into his arms. Lord, she weighed nothing, just bones and fabric, and carried her toward his wagon. Behind him, the whispers started immediately. "Did you see that? Jonas Hale taking in a strange woman? Sarah's barely been dead 2 years. And with young Evan in the house. Someone should tell the sheriff." Jonas blocked it all out. He'd gotten good at that these past 2 years. He settled the woman in the back of his wagon on a bed of blankets he kept for emergencies, made sure she was covered, then climbed onto the driver's seat. Doc Brennan hauled himself up beside him. "That was a damn fool thing to do." "Probably. You know what people will say. Don't care." "Like hell you don't." Doc Brennan sighed. "But I suppose someone had to help the poor girl. Might as well be you." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking over the rutted road that led out of town toward Jonas's ranch. The land here was brown and gold, rolling prairie broken by stands of cottonwood along the creek. In the distance, the crazy mountains rose against the sky, their peaks already white with early snow. "You know anything about her?" Doc Brennan asked eventually. "Nothing. Could be trouble?" "Could be. She could be married, running from the law, running from debts." "Could be all three." Doc Brennan made a frustrated sound. "Then why in God's name did you take her in?" Jonas didn't answer for a long time. He watched the familiar landscape roll by, the same views he'd seen every day for 10 years since he and Sarah had claimed this land. He thought about the empty house waiting for him, the silent meals, Evan's hollow eyes, the way the quiet had become so loud it was deafening. "Someone had to," he said finally. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was all he could put into words. The truth was that when he'd looked down at that woman's face, unconscious and vulnerable, he'd seen something he recognized: desperation, the kind that came from having nowhere left to turn, no one left to trust. He'd felt it himself these past 2 years, drowning in grief and responsibility, trying to raise a traumatized boy while keeping a ranch alive. The truth was that her hands looked like Sarah's hands had looked when they'd first met, refined but roughened, a lady fallen on hard times. The truth was that the house had been falling apart for 2 years, and he was so damn tired of doing it alone. But Jonas Hale wasn't a man who spoke truths out loud, so he kept his eyes on the road and let the silence settle between them. Lydia woke to the smell of wood smoke and coffee. For one blissful moment, she thought she was home in Philadelphia, in her childhood bedroom, and her mother was making breakfast downstairs. Then memory came crashing back. David, the debts, the flight, the train, and her eyes flew open. She was in a bed, a real bed, with a quilt that smelled like cedar and sunshine. The room was small but clean, with whitewashed walls and a single window looking out onto prairie. A washstand stood in the corner with a white pitcher and basin. A simple dress hung on a peg by the door, old but serviceable, much better than the rags she'd been wearing. How long had she been unconscious? Lydia sat up slowly, her head swimming. She was wearing a nightgown, not hers, obviously, and someone had washed her face and arms. Through the floorboards came the murmur of male voices and the clatter of dishes. She stood on shaking legs and made her way to the window. The view took her breath away. She was on a ranch, that much was clear. A barn stood 50 yards from the house, red paint fading to pink. Beyond that, corrals and pastures stretched toward distant mountains. Cattle dotted the landscape like scattered stones. And above it all, a sky so big and blue it hurt to look at. "You're awake." Lydia spun around, her heart hammering. A man stood in the doorway, the biggest man she'd ever seen. Well over 6 feet, with shoulders that filled the doorframe and hands that looked like they could snap her in half. He had dark hair going gray at the temples, a face carved from granite, and eyes that were a startling shade of blue. Those eyes studied her with an intensity that made her want to hide. Her voice came out as a whisper. "Where am I?" "My ranch, 10 miles outside Sweetwater." His voice was deep and rough, like gravel in a barrel. "You collapsed in town. Doc Brennan said you needed rest and food, so I brought you here." "You—" Lydia's mind struggled to process this. "Why?" "Seemed like you needed help. But you don't know me. I could be anyone. I could be— trouble?" A ghost of something, maybe humor, maybe bitterness, crossed his face. "Probably, but you were dying in the street and no one else was going to do a damn thing about it." The casual profanity should have shocked her. Instead, Lydia found it oddly reassuring. This was a man who said what he meant. "I don't have money," she said quietly. "I can't pay you for—" "Didn't ask for money." "Then what—" "Come downstairs when you're ready. We'll talk." He turned to leave, then paused. "The dress is for you. Belonged to my wife. She's gone now, so—" He didn't finish the sentence, just walked away, his boots heavy on the wooden stairs. Lydia stood frozen for a long moment. His wife's dress. His wife's bed, probably. His wife's room. Where was she? And why had this stranger brought Lydia into his home? 20 minutes later, Lydia descended the stairs wearing the borrowed dress. It was too short. The previous owner had been taller, but it was clean and whole and warmer than anything she'd worn in months. She'd used the pitcher and basin to wash as best she could and had tried to do something with her hair, but it was a lost cause. 2 years of poor nutrition and stress had thinned it terribly. The kitchen was bigger than she'd expected, with a cook stove, a large table, and windows that let in floods of morning light. The man who'd brought her here stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with surprising dexterity for someone with such large hands. At the table sat a boy. He was small, maybe 7 or 8, with dark hair and eyes that were too old for his face. He stared at Lydia with an expression that was neither friendly nor hostile, just blank, as if he'd learned not to feel anything at all. "Sit," the man said, not looking up from the stove. Lydia sat. A moment later, a plate appeared in front of her, 3 pancakes, butter, and a dark syrup that smelled like heaven. Then a cup of coffee, hot and strong. Eat! Lydia's hands trembled as she picked up her fork. She wanted to devour the food, to stuff it in her mouth as fast as she could, but years of her mother's etiquette training held firm. She cut a small piece, brought it to her mouth, and nearly wept at the taste. The man sat down across from her with his own plate. The boy still hadn't touched his food, just watched her with those unsettling eyes. "My name is Jonas Hale," the man said. "This is my nephew, Evan. His parents, my brother and sister-in-law, died in a house fire last year. He lives with me now." "I'm sorry," Lydia whispered, looking at the boy. Evan's expression didn't change. "He doesn't talk much anymore," Jonas continued. "Doc says it's the shock. Says he might come out of it, might not." He took a bite of pancake, chewed, swallowed. "So, your turn. Who are you, and what brought you to Montana with nothing but rags and a flour sack?" Lydia set down her fork carefully. "My name is Lydia Morin. I came from Philadelphia. I saw an advertisement for a housekeeper position, and She faltered. "You ran," Jonas said flatly. "From what?" "My husband." The words felt like broken glass in her throat. He was violent, and when he died, I discovered he'd left me with nothing but debts. His creditors wanted to put me in a workhouse, so I left." Jonas studied her for a long moment. "Your husband's dead?" "Yes." "You got papers proving it?" "No, I left too quickly." "So legally, you might still be married?" "Legally, yes. In reality, I'm a widow." Jonas nodded slowly, as if filing this information away. "The housekeeper position, that was mine. My wife, Sarah, she died 2 years ago, pneumonia. I hired a woman from town, but she only lasted 3 months. Said it was too lonely out here, and Evan scared her." Lydia glanced at the boy. He was still watching her, still not eating. "He doesn't scare me. Most women won't come within 10 feet of him. He had episodes at first, screaming, thrashing, breaking things." Jonas's voice was carefully neutral. "Doesn't do that anymore. Now he just sits and stares." "That's worse," Lydia said quietly. Jonas's eyes snapped to hers, and for the first time she saw real emotion there, surprise, and something like understanding. "Yeah," he said, "it is." They sat in silence for a moment. Through the window, Lydia could see the vast Montana landscape stretching away in all directions. So much space, so much emptiness. "Here's what I'm thinking," Jonas said finally. "I need help. The house is falling apart. I can't cook worth a damn. Evan needs something, someone. I don't know what, but what he's got now isn't enough." He gestured to the kitchen, the house. "You need a place to stay, food to eat, shelter. I'm proposing an arrangement." Well, Lydia's stomach tightened. She'd heard about arrangements before. "What kind of arrangement?" "The legal kind." Jonas's face hardened. "You work as my housekeeper. You cook, clean, help with Evan. In exchange, you get room, board, and a small wage, say $10 a month. We draw up a proper contract with the town lawyer. Everything official and above board." "Why?" Lydia couldn't help asking. "You don't know me. I could be a terrible housekeeper. I could rob you blind. I could—" "Could you?" She met his eyes. "No." "Then that's settled." "But people will talk," Lydia said. "A woman alone with a man, even with a child in the house. People are already talking. Have been since I carried you out of town." Jonas shrugged. "This is a small town, Mrs. Morin. People talk about everything. They'll say you're my mistress, or I'm taking advantage, or you're a gold digger, or whatever else their small minds can dream up. You can let that bother you, or you can ignore it and do the work. And if I do the work, if I stay, then you've got a home, as long as you need one." Lydia looked around the kitchen, the dirty dishes piled in the wash basin, the floor that needed sweeping, the curtains that were more dust than fabric. She thought about the alternative, the workhouse in Philadelphia, or worse, the streets. She thought about the way this huge, gruff man had scooped her up without hesitation, had brought her to his home, had fed her without asking for anything in return. She thought about the boy with the empty eyes who needed someone to see him. "I'll stay," she said. "But I want it in writing. A proper contract, like you said. I won't be beholden to anyone ever again." For the first time, Jonas Hale almost smiled. "Fair enough." He stood, gathered the plates, Evan still hadn't touched his, and carried them to the wash basin. "You can start tomorrow. Today, you rest. Doc Brennan said you need at least 3 days before you should do any real work." "I can start now." "You'll start tomorrow." His tone left no room for argument. "There's a spare room upstairs, second door on the left. That's yours now. We'll go into town on Saturday, get you some proper clothes and supplies. Until then, you rest and eat. You're no good to me if you collapse again." It wasn't kind exactly, but it wasn't cruel either. It was practical, straightforward. Lydia found that she appreciated it more than any amount of false sympathy. "All right," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Hale." "Jonas," he corrected. "If you're going to live here, we might as well use first names." "Then call me Lydia." He nodded once, then turned to the boy. "Evan, show Lydia where the linens are kept. She'll need to know where everything is." For a moment, Lydia thought the boy wouldn't respond. Then slowly he stood and walked toward the stairs. He didn't look at her, didn't speak, but he paused at the bottom step and waited. It was enough. Lydia followed him up the stairs, her heart beating hard against her ribs. She had no idea if she was making the best decision of her life or the worst. But for the first time in 2 years, she had a roof over her head, food in her stomach, and something resembling hope. That would have to be enough. The first week passed in a blur of work and exhaustion. True to his word, Jonas gave Lydia 3 days to rest. On the 4th day, she woke before dawn and got to work. The house was in worse shape than she'd thought. Dust lay thick on every surface. The windows were so dirty she could barely see through them. The stove needed a thorough cleaning. The floors were covered in tracked-in mud, and worse. And the smell, a combination of old grease, unwashed men, and general neglect, was nearly overwhelming. Lydia rolled up her sleeves and began. By noon, she'd cleaned the kitchen from top to bottom, baked bread, and started a stew for dinner. By evening, she'd scrubbed the floors and washed the windows. Her back ached, her hands were raw, but the satisfaction of seeing clean surfaces was worth every minute of pain. Jonas came in for dinner, looked around the transformed kitchen, and grunted. "Looks good." It was the closest to praise she'd get, Lydia suspected, but she found herself smiling anyway. Evan remained a shadow. He appeared for meals, ate mechanically, then disappeared to his room or outside to the barn. He never spoke, never made eye contact, never showed any sign of noticing the changes Lydia was making to the house. But on the 5th day, she found something interesting. She was cleaning Evan's room. Jonas had given her permission with a warning that the boy doesn't like people touching his things, when she discovered a stack of books under his bed. Not children's books, but proper literature. Dickens, Hawthorne, even some poetry. That evening at dinner, Lydia tried something new. "I found your books, Evan," she said casually as she served the stew. "I love Dickens. Have you read Great Expectations?" Evan didn't respond, but his fork paused halfway to his mouth. Jonas shot her a look that said, "Be careful." "I always thought Pip was rather foolish," Lydia continued as if having a normal conversation. "All that time chasing after Estella, when she made it clear she didn't care for him. Though I suppose we've all done foolish things for love." Evan's fork lowered slowly. He still didn't look at her, but she could see a muscle working in his jaw. Progress. The next morning, she found one of the books on the kitchen table, Great Expectations. She opened it to the marked page and read a few paragraphs while she waited for the coffee to boil. When Evan came down for breakfast, he glanced at the book, then at her. Their eyes met for just a second before he looked away. But it was enough. Saturday came and Jonas kept his promise about going to town. "We need to get you proper clothes," he said at breakfast, "and we need to see the lawyer about that contract." Lydia had been dreading this. She knew what going to town meant, facing the gossip, the stares, the judgment, but she also knew it was necessary. "All right," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. They took the wagon, leaving Evan at home with strict instructions not to wander off. The boy watched them go with his usual blank expression, though Lydia thought she saw something flicker in his eyes when she promised to bring him back some peppermint sticks. The ride to town was quiet. Jonas wasn't much of a talker, and Lydia was too nervous to make conversation. She'd borrowed a shawl and had done her best to make herself presentable, but she knew how she must look: gaunt, worn, a woman clearly down on her luck. Sweetwater was busier on Saturday. Ranchers came in from miles around to trade and socialize. The street was crowded with wagons, horses, and people. Everyone stopped to stare when Jonas helped Lydia down from the wagon. "Ignore them," Jonas muttered, offering his arm. "Come on." Their first stop was the general store. Mr. Callahan, the proprietor, was a jovial man with a round belly and shrewd eyes. "Jonas," he boomed, "good to see you. And this must be the young lady who caused such a stir last week." "This is Miss Lydia Morin," Jonas said formally. "My new housekeeper. She needs supplies. Put it all on my account." Mr. Callahan's eyebrows rose, but he was too good a businessman to question a paying customer. Of course, Miss Morin, right this way." For the next hour, Lydia selected fabric for new dresses, undergarments, shoes that actually fit, and basic toiletries. She tried to choose the cheapest options, but Jonas kept pointing to better quality items. "You'll be working hard," he said when she protested. "You need clothes that will last." It was practical, not generous, but it still made something warm unfurl in Lydia's chest. While Mr. Callahan wrapped their purchases, Lydia noticed 3 women watching from near the fabric bolts. They whispered behind their hands, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. One of them, a woman in an expensive green dress with elaborate ringlets, detached from the group and approached. "Jonas Hale," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How wonderful to see you in town. And this must be your housekeeper?" "Lydia, this is Miriam Price," Jonas said, his tone flat. "The mayor's wife." "Charmed, I'm sure." Mrs. Price looked Lydia up and down as if inspecting livestock. "My, what a tragic story, collapsing in the street like that. You must have had quite an ordeal." "I'm quite recovered, thank you," Lydia said, keeping her voice polite. "Oh, I'm sure you are." Jonas always did have a soft heart, despite appearances. Mrs. Price smiled, showing too many teeth. "Though I must say it's rather unconventional, isn't it? A young woman living alone with a man. Even with poor little Evan as a chaperone, people do talk." "Let them," Jonas said curtly. "I'm simply saying that appearances matter, Jonas. Perhaps Miss Morin should stay in town. I'm sure we could find a room for her at the boarding house." "She's staying at the ranch." "But Jonas—" "Ma'am," Lydia surprised herself by speaking up. "I appreciate your concern, but Mr. Hale has been nothing but honorable. We have a business arrangement, nothing more. If people choose to think otherwise, that's their affair, not mine." Mrs. Price's face flushed. "Well, how very modern of you." "Is there anything else?" Jonas asked, his patience clearly wearing thin. No, I just thought, well, good day to you both." Mrs. Price swept away, her skirt swishing with indignation. Jonas looked at Lydia with something that might have been approval. "You handled that well." "I've had practice with difficult women," Lydia said quietly. "David's mother was formidable. Sarah's mother, too." Jonas picked up their parcels. "Come on. Lawyer's office is next." "Yeah." The lawyer, Mr. Edwin Marsh, was a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles in a careful manner. He listened as Jonas explained the situation, taking notes with a precise hand. "I see," he said when Jonas finished. "You want a formal employment contract, room, board, and $10 monthly wage in exchange for housekeeping services. Term of employment? Open-ended," Jonas said. "Either party can terminate with 2 weeks' notice." "Very well." Mr. Marsh began drafting the document. "Miss Morin, you understand this is purely an employment arrangement. There are no other expectations." Lydia felt her face heat. "I understand perfectly." "And you, Mr. Hale? You're clear on the terms?" "Crystal." Mr. Marsh nodded and continued writing. 20 minutes later, he slid 2 copies across the desk. "Sign here and here. I'll witness and file 1 copy with the county records. The other is for your keeping." Lydia read every word carefully before signing. It was exactly as Jonas had described. Straightforward, professional, with no hidden clauses or tricks. When she signed her name, her hand was steady. Jonas signed his copy, and Mr. Marsh added his witness signature with a flourish. "There," the lawyer said, "all legal and proper. Miss Morin, I hope you find happiness at the Hale Ranch." "Thank you," Lydia said, folding her copy of the contract carefully. Outside, Jonas loaded their purchases into the wagon while Lydia waited on the boardwalk. She noticed people still watching, still whispering. Mrs. Price stood with her friends outside the milliner's shop, talking animatedly. "Ignore them," Jonas said again, helping her into the wagon. "I'm trying. It'll die down eventually. Some other scandal will come along and they'll forget all about us." "You don't believe that?" Jonas gathered the reins, his face grim. "No, but it's nice to pretend." They stopped at the dry goods store for the peppermint sticks Lydia had promised Evan. Jonas also purchased coffee, sugar, flour, and other staples without asking Lydia what she needed. He seemed to have a good sense of what the kitchen required. As they headed out of town, Lydia found herself looking back at Sweetwater. It wasn't a large town, maybe 100 families at most, but it had everything necessary for survival: shops, a church, a school, a doctor, and so many watching eyes. "You get used to it," Jonas said, as if reading her thoughts. "Do you?" "Eventually you stop caring, or at least you pretend to." He glanced at her. "You did good today, standing up to Miriam Price like that. Most people are too intimidated." "I'm not most people." "I'm starting to see that." They rode in comfortable silence for a while. The afternoon sun was warm, and the prairies stretched away on all sides, golden and peaceful. Lydia found herself relaxing for the first time in days. "Can I ask you something?" she said eventually. "Depends on the question." "Why did you really help me? You could have left me in town, let someone else deal with it. Why did you take me to your ranch?" Jonas was quiet for so long that Lydia thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I told you, someone had to." "That's not the whole truth." He shot her a sharp look, then sighed. "No, it's not." He stared at the road ahead. "When Sarah died, I stopped living. Just went through the motions. Then Evan came, and he was so broken, and I didn't know how to help him. We were both drowning, just in different ways." He paused. "When I saw you on that platform, looking like death warmed over but still standing, I saw myself. I saw Evan, people who'd been knocked down so hard they forgot how to get back up. And I thought, maybe if I help you, maybe it'll remind me that people can be helped, that it's not too late." Lydia's throat tightened. "Is it? Too late?" "Don't know yet." Jonas looked at her, his blue eyes intense. "But I figure we've got as good a chance as any." The ranch came into view over the next rise. The barn, the house, the corrals. It looked small and lonely against the vast landscape, but to Lydia, it looked like hope. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for the chance." Jonas just nodded and urged the horses faster toward home. That night, after dinner, Lydia did something she'd been planning all week. She'd noticed that Evan always sat in the same spot by the fireplace, staring into the flames without really seeing them. She'd also noticed the way his eyes lingered on the book she'd been reading. So after the dishes were done and Jonas had gone out to check on the horses, Lydia settled into the chair opposite Evan, opened Great Expectations to the first page, and began to read aloud. Evan's head jerked up, his eyes wide. "My father's family name being Pierip, and my Christian name Philip, my infant tongue could make of both names nothing longer or more explicit than Pip," Lydia continued, her voice steady and clear. Evan stared at her. For a moment she thought he would bolt from the room. Instead, he slowly sank back into his chair, his eyes fixed on her face. She read for an hour until Jonas came back inside and stopped short at the sight. "What's this?" he asked quietly. "Reading," Lydia said, marking her place. "Evan and I are enjoying Dickens together. Aren't we, Evan?" The boy didn't answer, but he didn't deny it either. Jonas looked between them, something unreadable in his expression. Then he nodded once and went to get ready for bed. Lydia read for another chapter, then closed the book. "We'll continue tomorrow night, if you'd like." Evan stood and walked toward the stairs. At the bottom step, he paused. Thank you, he whispered. The words were so soft Lydia almost missed them. By the time she processed what he'd said, he was already gone, his footsteps disappearing up the stairs. But he'd spoken. For the first time in months, Evan had spoken. Lydia sat alone in the dim room, the book heavy in her lap, and felt tears prick her eyes. Not from sadness, but from something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten the name for it. Hope. She was still sitting there when Jonas came back down in his nightshirt, probably to bank the fire for the night. He stopped when he saw her face. You all right? He spoke, Lydia whispered. Just now. He thanked me. Jonas's expression didn't change, but his hand tightened on the stair railing. First time in 8 months. I know. They stood in silence, the magnitude of the moment settling between them. Then Jonas cleared his throat roughly. That was good. What you did. Reading to him. He paused. Sarah used to do that. Read to him. He loved it. I'll keep doing it then, if that's all right. More than all right. Jonas moved to the fire, began banking the coals. You're good with him. Better than I am. You're too hard on yourself. Am I? He straightened, his face shadowed in the firelight. I can keep him fed and clothed, keep him safe, but I don't know how to reach him. Don't know how to make him feel things again. You reach him, Lydia said softly. He watches you constantly. He's learning from you, how to be strong, how to survive. But he also needs, she searched for the words, he needs permission to feel again, to be a child again. You're teaching him strength. Let me teach him softness. Jonas studied her for a long moment. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone temporary? Someone who'd run at the first sign of difficulty? He shook his head. But you're not running, are you? No, Lydia said. I'm done running. Good. Jonas headed for the stairs, then paused. That contract we signed today, the one that says either party can leave with 2 weeks' notice? Yes? I hope you never use it. He was gone before Lydia could respond, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. She sat alone in the dying firelight, the book still in her lap, and thought about the strange turns life could take. 3 weeks ago, she'd been starving in Philadelphia, terrified and alone. Now she was in Montana, in a ranch house that was slowly becoming a home, with a broken man and a traumatized boy who were slowly becoming something like family. It wasn't what she'd imagined when she'd fled Philadelphia. It wasn't what she'd hoped for when she'd bought that train ticket. It was better. Lydia carried the book upstairs to her room, the one that had belonged to Jonas's wife. She'd been nervous about sleeping here at first, worried she was intruding on sacred space, but gradually she'd come to understand that Sarah was gone, and this was just a room that needed someone to live in it, to breathe life back into it. She changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed, pulling the cedar-scented quilt up to her chin. Through the window she could see 1,000,000 stars scattered across the black sky. Tomorrow she would wake early and make breakfast. She would continue cleaning and organizing. She would read to Evan again. She would learn the rhythms of ranch life, the patterns of this strange new household. Tomorrow she would take another step away from the woman she'd been and toward the woman she was becoming. But tonight, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Lydia Morin fell asleep feeling safe. The weeks that followed became a rhythm Lydia had never known she craved, the kind of rhythm that came from honest work, clean air, and the simple satisfaction of watching something broken slowly mend. She woke before dawn each morning, lit the stove, and had coffee brewing by the time Jonas came down from his room. He'd nod his thanks, pour himself a cup, and head out to the barn while she started breakfast. Evan would appear like a ghost, silent but present, and the three of them would eat together as the sun painted the prairie gold. Then Jonas would disappear into his day, mending fences, checking cattle, chopping wood for winter, and Lydia would begin hers. She attacked the neglected house with a ferocity that surprised even herself, scrubbing years of bachelor grime from every corner. She washed curtains that fell apart in her hands, so she sewed new ones from flour sacks. She discovered a vegetable garden buried under weeds and spent an entire day resurrecting it, salvaging the last of the season's carrots and potatoes. The house slowly transformed. Windows gleamed, floors shone. The smell of baking bread replaced the stale odor of defeat. And every evening, after dinner, Lydia would settle by the fire with a book and read aloud while Evan listened with an intensity that bordered on desperation. He still didn't speak much, a word here, a whisper there, but his silences had changed. They were no longer the empty silences of shock, but the thoughtful silences of a boy learning to feel again. And Jonas watched it all with those careful blue eyes, saying nothing. But Lydia could feel his presence in every corner of the house, solid and steady as the mountains themselves. By the end of the first month, Lydia realized she had stopped thinking about Philadelphia entirely. David's face had faded from her dreams. The fear that had driven her west had loosened its grip on her chest. She was too busy, too tired, and though she'd never say it aloud, too content to dwell on the past. But contentment, Lydia was learning, was a fragile thing in a place like Sweetwater. It was mid-December when trouble arrived, dressed in a respectable gray suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Lydia was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the horse approaching. Jonas was out on the far pasture and Evan was in the barn doing his chores, so she wiped her hands on her apron and walked around to the front of the house. A man sat astride a fine bay gelding, surveying the ranch with the air of someone appraising property. He was perhaps 50, with thinning hair and the soft hands of someone who'd never done manual labor. When he saw Lydia, his expression shifted to one of practiced sympathy. "Good afternoon," he called, dismounting with the stiffness of someone unused to horses. "I'm looking for Mr. Jonas Hale." "He's not here at the moment," Lydia said, keeping her distance. "Can I take a message?" "And you are?" "The housekeeper." The man's eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "I see. Well, perhaps you can help me. My name is Vernon Price. I'm with the Sweetwater Bank and Trust. I'm here on rather urgent business regarding Mr. Hale's property." Lydia's stomach dropped. "What kind of business?" "The financial kind, I'm afraid." Mr. Price opened his briefcase and withdrew a sheaf of papers. "You see, Mr. Hale has a substantial loan with our bank, taken out 5 years ago to purchase additional grazing land. The terms of that loan required regular payments, which Mr. Hale has been, shall we say, inconsistent about meeting." "I don't know anything about Mr. Hale's financial affairs," Lydia said carefully. "Of course not, but as someone living on the property, you should be aware that the bank is considering foreclosure proceedings. Mr. Hale is 3 months behind on his payments, and if he doesn't settle his debt by the end of January, we'll have no choice but to seize the ranch." The words hit Lydia like a physical blow. Foreclosure. The ranch seized. Everything Jonas had built, everything he was fighting to preserve for Evan, gone. "There must be some mistake," she heard herself say. "The ranch is doing well. The cattle aren't the issue, miss. It's Mr. Hale's inability to manage his finances. Between his late wife's medical expenses and taking in his nephew, he stretched himself too thin." Mr. Price smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Of course, if he could come up with, say, $300 by month's end, we could work something out." $300. It might as well have been 3,000. "I'll make sure he gets your message," Lydia said, her voice cold. "Please do." "And miss?" Mr. Price climbed back onto his horse. "You might want to start looking for a new position. I'd hate for you to be caught unawares when the bank takes possession." He rode away, leaving Lydia standing in the yard with her heart pounding and her mind racing. $300. 3 months behind. Foreclosure by the end of January. Jonas hadn't said a word. She was still standing there, frozen, when Evan appeared from the barn. He took one look at her face and his eyes widened. "What's wrong?" His voice was still whisper-soft, but the concern in it was real. "Nothing," Lydia lied. Then, seeing the disbelief in his expression, she sighed. "A man from the bank came by. There's some trouble with the loan on the ranch." "Uncle Jonas doesn't like to talk about money," Evan said quietly. "He gets angry when people ask." "Does he?" Lydia filed that information away. "Well, I'm not going to ask, but when he comes home, I need you to go to the barn and stay there for a while. Can you do that?" Evan nodded solemnly, understanding more than his 8 years should allow. Jonas returned at dusk, his shoulders sagging with exhaustion. Lydia had dinner ready, venison stew, fresh bread, and dried apple pie, and waited until he'd eaten before she spoke. "A man from the bank came by today." Jonas's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. His jaw tightened. Vernon Price, Lydia continued, keeping her voice neutral. He said you're 3 months behind on your loan payments. He said the bank is considering foreclosure. For a long moment, Jonas didn't speak. Then he set down his fork with exaggerated care. That's my business. It's my business too if I'm going to wake up one morning and find we're all being thrown out. We're not getting thrown out. Then you have the $300 he's demanding? Jonas's silence was answer enough. Lydia took a breath, fighting to keep her temper in check. Why didn't you tell me? I've been living here for 2 months, working for wages you clearly can't afford. I can afford it. Can you? Can you really? Lydia stood, her hands braced on the table. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're drowning and too proud to admit it. Jonas surged to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You don't know a damn thing about it. Then tell me what's happening so I can help. I don't need your help. His voice was thunder in the small kitchen. I don't need anyone's help. I can handle this myself. Like you've been handling it, Lydia shot back, by falling 3 months behind, by risking everything you've built? That's not handling it, Jonas. That's drowning with your eyes closed. They stood facing each other across the table, both breathing hard, the air crackling with tension. Lydia had never seen Jonas lose his temper before, had never seen any emotion stronger than mild annoyance cross his face. Now his eyes blazed with fury and something else, something that looked almost like shame. You think I don't know? His voice dropped to something dangerous and low. You think I don't lie awake every night trying to figure out how to keep this place running? Sarah's medical bills wiped out our savings, the funeral costs, bringing Evan here, getting him the things he needs. And then the damn cattle prices dropped and half my herd got sick, and the bank keeps raising the interest, and I'm working myself to death just to stay in the same damn place. He slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes jump. Lydia didn't flinch. So don't stand there and tell me I'm not trying, Jonas continued, his voice ragged. Don't tell me I'm not doing enough. Because I'm doing everything I know how to do, and it's still not enough, and I don't need you reminding me of that fact. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Then, from the doorway, came a small, broken voice. Is it my fault? They both spun around. Evan stood there, his face white, his eyes huge with tears. Am I why we're losing the ranch? Because you had to take care of me? No. Jonas crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to one knee in front of the boy. Evan, no, none of this is your fault. You hear me? None of it. But you said the cost. I'd pay them 100 times over to have you here. Jonas's voice shook. Your family, this is your home, and we're not losing it. I promise you, we're not losing it. Evan threw his arms around Jonas's neck, and the big man held him tight, his eyes squeezed shut. Over the boy's head, his gaze found Lydia's. She saw it all there, the fear, the exhaustion, the crushing weight of responsibility he'd been carrying alone for too long. And underneath it all, the desperate love for a broken boy he was trying so hard to save. Her anger melted away. I have some money, she said quietly. Jonas's eyes snapped to hers. What? From before I left Philadelphia, I sold some things. My mother's jewelry, some silver. I hid it in case David found out. It's not much, maybe $40, but no. Jonas stood, keeping one hand on Evan's shoulder. Absolutely not. Jonas, that's your money, your escape fund. You keep it. What am I escaping from now? Lydia asked. I'm here. This is my home too. And if the ranch goes, where do you think I'll end up? Back on that train platform with nothing but rags? She shook her head. We're in this together, whether you like it or not. Jonas stared at her for a long moment, emotions warring across his face. I can't take your money. You can, and you will. And then we're going to sit down and figure out how to get the rest. Lydia pulled out a chair and sat, smoothing her apron with hands that were steadier than she felt. Now, the bank wants $300. I have 40. That leaves 260. What assets do we have? Lydia, Jonas, sit down. Something in her voice must have gotten through to him because he sat. Evan climbed into his chair beside him, his small hand finding his uncle's larger one. "We have about 60 head of cattle," Jonas said finally, his voice heavy with defeat. "But the prices are too low right now to make it worth selling. We'd lose money." "What else?" "Some horses. Most are working animals, but I've got 2 geldings I could sell. Might get $50 for the pair if I'm lucky." Lydia did the math in her head. "That's $90 total. We need 170 more." "I could sell the south pasture," Jonas said slowly. "The land my brother left to Evan. But that's his inheritance. I won't touch it unless there's no other choice." "Then we find another way." Lydia tapped her fingers on the table, thinking. "What about taking on extra work? Are there other ranches that need help?" "It's winter. Nobody's hiring." "Then what do people need in winter?" Jonas frowned. "Firewood, meat, help with repairs." "Could you do those things? Chop and sell firewood, hunt and sell the meat, offer your skills as a carpenter or blacksmith?" "I suppose, but nothing. We do what we have to do." Lydia turned to Evan. "And you? Can you read and write well?" The boy nodded. "Then you can help me. I'm going to start taking in laundry and mending from town. You'll help me keep track of what belongs to who." She looked back at Jonas. "Between your $40 from the horses, my 40, and whatever we can earn in the next 6 weeks, we'll get that money." "Lydia, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." She met his eyes steadily. "You took me in when no one else would. You gave me a home when I had nothing. Did you really think I'd just stand by and watch you lose everything?" Jonas's throat worked. "This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment you signed that contract. We're a household now. We rise together or we fall together." She reached across the table and laid her hand over his. "Let me help, Jonas. Let me pay back what you've given me." For a moment she thought he'd refuse. Jonas Hale was a proud man, and accepting help went against every instinct he had. But then his hand turned under hers, his calloused palm pressing against hers, warm and solid. "All right," he said quietly. "We do this together." Evan looked between them, hope dawning on his face for the first time since the banker had delivered his terrible news. "We can really save the ranch?" "We can try," Jonas said. "That's all anyone can do." That night, long after Evan had gone to bed and Jonas had returned from his final check of the animals, Lydia sat by the fire and made lists. Income, expenses, what they could earn, what they needed. The numbers were daunting, but not impossible. She was so focused on her calculations that she didn't hear Jonas come back downstairs until he cleared his throat. "Thought you'd be asleep by now," he said. "Too much to plan." Lydia set down her pencil. "I was thinking if I start the laundry business, I'll need to let people in town know. Maybe put up notices at the general store and the church." "They'll talk," Jonas warned. "Say you're taking work away from other women." "Let them talk. We need the money more than I need their approval." She paused. "Unless it bothers you, the gossip." "I stopped caring what people think a long time ago." Jonas settled into the chair across from her, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "But I worry about you, about what they'll say, about how they'll treat you. I've survived worse than small-town gossip. Have you?" His eyes were too knowing. "You don't talk much about Philadelphia, about what you left behind." Lydia's hands tightened on her pencil. "There's nothing to talk about. Your husband, David, you said he was violent. I don't want to discuss this. Did he hurt you badly?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Lydia wanted to deflect, to change the subject, but something in Jonas's expression stopped her. He wasn't asking out of morbid curiosity. He was asking because he understood what it meant to carry scars no one else could see. "Yes," she said quietly. "He hurt me badly. And when he died, fell down the stairs during one of his drunken rages, I felt nothing but relief. Does that make me a terrible person?" "No." Jonas's voice was firm. "It makes you human." "The church would disagree. The church hasn't lived your life." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "When Sarah died, everyone expected me to be devastated, and I was, but not in the way they thought. I was devastated because she'd suffered so much at the end, because I couldn't fix it, couldn't make it better. But I was also, he paused, searching for words, relieved, because her pain was over, because I didn't have to watch her waste away anymore. And I hated myself for feeling that way. It wasn't wrong to feel relief, Lydia said softly. Wasn't it? What kind of man feels relieved when his wife dies? The kind who loved her enough to want her suffering to end. Lydia set down her lists and met his eyes. We're allowed to feel more than one thing at a time, Jonas. Love and relief, grief and hope. It doesn't make us bad people. It makes us survivors. Jonas was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Sarah would have liked you. Would she? She always said this house needed laughter, needed life. He looked at Lydia. You've brought both. Evan's reading again, smiling sometimes. And the house, he gestured vaguely. It feels like a home again. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Lydia's chest tightened. I'm just doing my job. No, you're doing more than that. Jonas stood, suddenly restless. When Vernon Price came here today, threatening to take everything, my first thought wasn't about losing the land or the house. It was about losing this. This thing we've built here, you, me, Evan, this family that somehow came together out of nothing. Jonas, I know what people in town say about us, he continued, his back to her. I know what they think. That you're my mistress. That I took advantage of a desperate woman. That this whole arrangement is improper. He turned to face her. Do you want to know the truth? Lydia's heart hammered in her chest. What truth? The truth is that every morning when I wake up, I'm grateful you're here. The truth is that I notice things. How you hum while you cook. How you tuck your hair behind your ear when you're concentrating. How you smile at Evan when you think no one's watching. The truth is that somewhere along the way, you stopped being just my housekeeper and became... He trailed off, shaking his head. Never mind. Forget I said anything. Became what? Lydia stood, her pulse racing. Jonas became what? Someone I can't imagine losing. The words came out rough, almost angry. Someone I look forward to seeing every damn day. Someone who makes this house feel less empty and my life feel less pointless. He ran a hand through his hair. And that scares the hell out of me because I swore after Sarah died that I'd never let anyone that close again. That I'd never risk that kind of pain again. Lydia's breath caught. I'm scared too. Are you? Terrified. She moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. I swore I'd never depend on anyone again. Never let anyone have power over me. Never trust a man again after what David did. She stopped a few feet away from him. But then you carried me out of that town without asking for anything in return. You gave me work and dignity and a place to belong, and every day you show me what a good man looks like, how patience looks, how quiet strength looks, and it terrifies me because I'm starting to... She swallowed hard. I'm starting to feel things I promised myself I'd never feel again. Jonas closed the distance between them in 2 strides. He stopped just close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, could smell the scent of wood smoke and leather that clung to his clothes. What things? His voice was barely above a whisper. Lydia looked up at him, this man who'd saved her life without knowing it, this man who was slowly saving her heart. Safe, she said. I feel safe with you, and that's more frightening than any danger I've ever faced. Jonas lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face with a gentleness that made her eyes sting. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. I won't hurt you, he said. I'd rather die than hurt you. I know. And she did. In her bones, in her soul, she knew this man would never raise his hand to her in anger. But that doesn't mean we can't hurt each other in other ways, by leaving, by dying, by living afraid, Jonas finished. Is that what you want? To spend the rest of your life so scared of being hurt that you never let yourself feel anything? I don't know what I want anymore. Then let me tell you what I want. His other hand came up to frame her face, his blue eyes intense in the firelight. I want to keep waking up and finding you in my kitchen. I want to hear you reading to Evan every night. I want to fight beside you to save this ranch. And when that's done, I want... He paused. I want the right to call you mine, not as my housekeeper, as my... A crash from upstairs made them both jump apart. "Evan!" Jonas was moving before Lydia could process what had happened, taking the stairs 3 at a time. She followed, her heart in her throat. They found the boy on the floor of his room, tangled in blankets, his face flushed and his breathing labored. "Nightmare," he gasped. I'm sorry. Shh, it's all right." Jonas lifted him back into bed with practiced ease. "Just a dream. You're safe." But Evan was shaking, his eyes wide and unfocused. "The fire. I saw the fire. Mama and Papa." "They're gone," Jonas said gently. "But you're here. You're safe. I've got you." Lydia knelt beside the bed and took Evan's hand. It was hot, almost burning. "Jonas, he has a fever." Jonas pressed his palm to the boy's forehead and swore softly. "I'll get Doc Brennan." "It's midnight. The storm—" "I don't care." Jonas was already moving toward the door. "Stay with him. Keep him cool. I'll be back as soon as I can." He was gone before Lydia could argue, his boots thundering down the stairs, the front door slamming behind him. A moment later, she heard horse hooves pounding away into the night. Lydia turned back to Evan. The boy was shivering despite the fever, his teeth chattering. She grabbed extra blankets and tucked them around him, then sat on the edge of the bed and began to stroke his hair. "Tell me a story," Evan whispered. "Like Mama used to." Lydia's throat tightened. "What kind of story?" "A happy one, where nobody dies." So Lydia began to spin a tale about a brave knight and a clever princess and a dragon who turned out to be friendly. She made her voice light and cheerful even as her hands shook. The fever was high, too high, and she knew enough about frontier medicine to know that children could turn critical frighteningly fast. "Please let the doctor come in time," she prayed silently. "Please let this boy be all right." Evan's eyes began to droop as she talked, his breathing evening out. She kept talking, kept stroking his hair, and gradually his body relaxed into sleep. But the fever didn't break. Lydia dipped a cloth in the wash basin and laid it across his forehead, then another on his chest. She'd seen her mother do this during her own childhood illnesses, had learned that sometimes all you could do was keep vigil and hope. So she kept vigil. The hours crawled by. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. Snow began to fall. She could see it in the lamplight, thick and fast. A proper Montana blizzard brewing. And still Jonas didn't return. Lydia tried not to panic. Doc Brennan lived in town. A good hour's ride in good weather. In a snowstorm, it could take twice that. Jonas was an experienced rider. He'd be fine. They'd both be fine. Unless the storm was too bad. Unless Jonas's horse slipped on ice. Unless... No. She couldn't think like that. She changed the cloth on Evan's forehead again, checking his fever. Still high, but maybe not quite as high as before? Or was that just wishful thinking? "Lydia?" Evan's voice was thin and scared. "I'm here, sweetheart." "Are we going to lose the ranch?" "No, we're going to fight for it, remember?" "But what if we can't fight hard enough? What if—" He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "What if everything goes away again, like Mama and Papa?" Lydia's heart broke. "Nothing's going away. Your uncle and I are going to make sure of it." "Promise?" Shouldn't promise. Life was too uncertain, too cruel. But looking down at this frightened child who'd already lost so much, Lydia found herself saying, "I promise. This is your home, Evan. We're not losing it, and I'm not going anywhere." "What if Uncle Jonas sends you away after we save the ranch?" "He won't." "How do you know?" "Because he almost told me he loves me tonight," Lydia thought. "Because I felt it in the way he touched my face, heard it in every word he didn't quite say." But she couldn't tell Evan that. Not yet. Maybe not ever, if Jonas decided he'd said too much. "Because we're a family now," she said instead. And families stick together. Evan's hand found hers under the blankets and squeezed weakly. "I'm glad you came here, even if you did show up looking like a scarecrow." Lydia laughed despite herself. "A scarecrow?" "That's what Uncle Jonas said. He said you looked like a scarecrow that had been through a tornado, but you had brave eyes." Evan's own eyes began to close. He was right. You do have brave eyes. "So do you," Lydia whispered, But the boy was already asleep again. She sat through the long, dark hours, listening to the storm howl outside, praying for Jonas to return, for Evan's fever to break, for dawn to come. She thought about Philadelphia and how she'd fled with nothing. She thought about stepping off that train in Montana, so desperate and afraid. She thought about Jonas carrying her to his wagon without hesitation. She thought about how, somewhere along the way, she'd stopped running and started building. And she thought about what Jonas had almost said by the fire, the confession that hung unfinished between them like a bridge half built. Someone I can't imagine losing. The feeling was mutual. Dawn was breaking, pale and gray through the snow, when Lydia finally heard hoofbeats. She ran downstairs and threw open the door to find Jonas and Doc Brennan struggling through drifts already 3 feet deep. "He's upstairs," she said without preamble. High fever, cough, nightmares. Doc Brennan headed straight up while Jonas stomped snow off his boots. His face was haggard with exhaustion and worry. "The storm," Lydia said. "I was so worried. Had to wait it out at the Crowder place, halfway to town." Jonas pulled off his gloves with numb fingers. "How's Evan?" "The fever hasn't broken, but he's resting." They followed Doc Brennan upstairs. The old doctor was already examining Evan, listening to his chest, checking his glands. After a few minutes, he straightened with a sigh. "Influenza, most likely. He's young and strong. He should pull through, but the next few days are critical." He pulled out bottles from his bag. "This is for the fever, this for the cough. Keep him warm, push fluids, and whatever you do, don't let him get chilled." He looked at Lydia. "You know how to nurse a sick child." "I'll learn." "Good woman." Doc Brennan packed up his bag. "I'll check back in 2 days if the roads are passable. Send for me immediately if he gets worse." Jonas walked him down, and Lydia heard their voices rumbling below. Doc Brennan giving more instructions, Jonas thanking him. Then the front door opened and closed, and silence settled over the house. Jonas returned to find Lydia mixing the medicine into water. His eyes met hers over Evan's sleeping form, and she saw everything there that he hadn't said the night before. The fear, the hope, the desperate need to protect what was his. "I'll stay with him," she said quietly. "You need to rest." "So do you." "I'm not tired." It was a lie. She was exhausted, but she could see Jonas was running on fumes. "Get a few hours of sleep. I'll wake you if anything changes." For once, Jonas didn't argue. He squeezed her shoulder once, a brief touch that said everything, then trudged to his room. Lydia settled into the chair beside Evan's bed and prepared for a long vigil. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in white silence. Inside, the house creaked and settled, and somewhere a clock ticked away the seconds. The world had narrowed to this room, this boy, this moment. Everything else, the bank, the debt, the uncertain future, could wait. Right now, all that mattered was keeping Evan alive and safe until the fever broke. So Lydia did what she'd been doing since she arrived in Montana. She fought. She fought the fever with cold compresses and medicine. She fought Evan's fear with stories and soft songs. She fought her own exhaustion with coffee and willpower. And slowly, as the day wore on and the storm raged outside, the fever began to lose its grip. By evening, Evan was sleeping more peacefully, his breathing easier. By midnight, his forehead felt cool under Lydia's hand. By dawn of the second day, he opened his eyes and asked for soup. Jonas, who'd been taking shifts with Lydia despite her protests, actually smiled. "That's my boy," he said, his voice rough with relief. "That's my brave boy." Lydia went downstairs to heat soup, her legs shaking with exhaustion and relief. 2 days of constant vigilance had taken their toll, but they'd won. Evan would be all right. She was stirring the pot when Jonas came down. He walked straight to her, turned her around, and pulled her into his arms. Lydia froze for half a second, then melted against him, her face pressed to his chest, his heartbeat steady under her ear. They stood like that for a long moment, not speaking, just holding on. "Thank you," Jonas finally said into her hair. "For keeping him alive. For not giving up." "I'd never give up on him." Lydia pulled back just enough to look up at Jonas. "Or on you." Jonas's hand came up to cup her face, just like he had 2 nights ago before Evan's nightmare interrupted them. "What I said before, I know. No, let me finish. His thumb traced her cheekbone. I want to court you properly. I want to give you the chance to say no, to walk away, to change your mind. But I also want you to know that when I look at you, I see my future. However long that future is, whatever it holds, I want you in it. Lydia's eyes stung with tears. Jonas, you don't have to answer now. Take your time. Think about it. I just needed you to know where I stand. Where I stand, Lydia said, rising on her toes, is right here. With you. With Evan. Fighting for this family and this ranch and this life we're building together. Jonas's eyes searched hers. You're sure? After everything you've been through? I'm sure. And she was. Terrifyingly, completely sure. I've spent 2 years running from the past. I'm done running. I want to stay here and build a future. With you. Jonas's arms tightened around her, and for a moment they just stood there in the quiet kitchen with the soup bubbling on the stove and the snow falling outside, and a boy upstairs who would be all right. They had 40 days to save the ranch. They had a mountain of work ahead and no guarantee of success. But standing in Jonas's arms, Lydia felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt hope. The soup was forgotten on the stove as Jonas bent his head and kissed her. It was nothing like David's kisses. Those had been demands, claims of ownership. This was a question, gentle and searching, asking permission with every breath. Lydia's hands came up to rest on Jonas's chest, feeling the steady hammer of his heart, and she answered that question with a soft sound that came from somewhere deep inside her. When they finally broke apart, Jonas rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. I've wanted to do that for weeks, he admitted. Only weeks? Lydia managed a shaky laugh. I've been thinking about it since you carried me out of town like some kind of avenging angel. Avenging angel, Jonas snorted. That's a first. Most people call me a hard-headed bastard. You're that too. Lydia pulled back, suddenly remembering where they were. The soup is probably burning, but neither of them moved to check it. Jonas kept his arms around her waist, as if afraid she might vanish if he let go. We should talk about this, about what it means. It means we have 40 days to save this ranch and figure out how to be... Lydia paused, searching for the right word. Whatever we're going to be to each other. And after, if we lose the ranch anyway, then we figure that out together too. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that worry and grief had carved there. I'm not going anywhere, Jonas. Whether we save this place or lose it, I'm staying. The relief in his eyes was almost painful to witness. He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, a gesture so tender it made her throat tight. A creak from upstairs reminded them they weren't alone. Jonas released her reluctantly, and Lydia hurried to salvage the soup, which was indeed starting to scorch on the bottom. I'll take this up to Evan, she said, ladling it into a bowl. You should eat something too. When was the last time you had a proper meal? Jonas rubbed the back of his neck, looking sheepish. Yesterday morning? That's what I thought. Lydia pointed to the table with her spoon. Sit, eat. I'll be back in a minute. She carried the soup upstairs to find Evan sitting up in bed, looking pale but alert. His eyes brightened when he saw her. Is that chicken soup? The very best chicken soup in Montana Territory, Lydia said, settling beside him with the bowl. Can you manage it yourself, or do you need help? I can do it. But his hands shook as he took the bowl, so Lydia kept one hand underneath just in case. He took a careful sip, then another. It's good. I'm glad. She watched him eat, noting the color slowly returning to his cheeks. You gave us quite a scare, you know. I heard you, Evan said quietly. Both nights. You and Uncle Jonas, taking turns sitting with me, reading to me, telling me stories. He looked up at her with those two old eyes. You didn't have to do that. Of course I did. You're... Lydia stopped, startled by the word that had almost come out of her mouth. You're mine. When had that happened? When had this traumatized boy become hers to protect, hers to love? I'm what? Evan prompted. You're part of this family, Lydia finished, and families take care of each other. Evan was quiet for a moment, concentrating on his soup. Then, so softly she almost missed it. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad Uncle Jonas found you. So am I. Lydia smoothed his hair back from his forehead. Now eat your soup and then rest. Doctor's orders. She was halfway to the door when Evan spoke again. Lydia, do you love him? She turned back, her heart skipping. What makes you ask that? I heard you talking, before I got sick, about fighting together and being scared, and he set down the bowl. Mama used to talk to Papa like that, when they thought I was asleep, all soft and careful, like words were precious things. Lydia came back and sat on the edge of the bed. How do you feel about that? If I did love him? Evan considered this seriously. I think Mama would have liked you, and I think Uncle Jonas has been sad for a long time, since before Aunt Sarah died even. But he's less sad now. He looked at her with those heartbreaking eyes. So if you love him, I think that's good. As long as you don't leave. I'm not leaving, Lydia promised. No matter what happens, I'm not leaving. Evan nodded, satisfied, and picked up his soup again. Lydia went back downstairs to find Jonas right where she'd left him, staring at his untouched bowl. He asked if I love you, she said without preamble. Jonas's head snapped up. What did you tell him? That I'm not leaving. That seemed more important. She sat across from him. But since you brought up courting earlier, I suppose we should be honest with each other. So yes, I do love you. I'm terrified of it, and I have no idea if it's real or just gratitude or some kind of madness brought on by exhaustion, but there it is. Jonas stared at her for a long moment. Then he pushed back from the table, came around to her side, and kissed her again, deeper this time, more certain, a promise sealed with lips and breath and the gentle scrape of his calloused hand against her neck. When he finally pulled back, his voice was rough. It's real. Whatever this is between us, it's real. Then we'll figure it out, Lydia said, after we save the ranch. After we save the ranch, Jonas agreed, which means we need to start making money, fast. The next morning, as soon as the roads were passable, they put their plan into action. Jonas hitched up the wagon and drove to town with his two best geldings tied behind. Lydia had spent the previous evening composing notices for her laundry and mending service, which Jonas would post at the general store and the church. Meanwhile, Lydia stayed home with Evan, who was recovering but still needed rest, and began preparations for what she hoped would be her first customers. She heated water in the big copper tub, organized her mending supplies, and tried not to count the hours until Jonas returned. The ranch felt different now, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Everything they'd built here, everything they were building, hung in the balance. Jonas returned at dusk with $53 from the sale of the horses and news that made Lydia's heart sink. Vernon Price was there, he said, unhitching the team with sharp, angry movements. Made a point of telling everyone within earshot that the bank would be taking possession of this place by February. Said he already has a buyer lined up, some cattle baron from Denver who wants to expand his holdings. He can't do that. We still have time. He can do whatever he wants. He's the mayor's brother. Jonas slammed the barn door harder than necessary. This whole thing stinks, Lydia. The loan terms were fair when I took it out, but somehow the interest keeps climbing. And now Vernon's talking about accelerated foreclosure, claiming I violated terms by falling behind. Is that legal? Who knows? The nearest real lawyer is in Helena, 3 days' ride. By the time I could get there and back, it'd be too late anyway. He leaned against the barn, suddenly looking exhausted. Maybe we should just accept it. Take what we can get and move on. No. Lydia crossed the yard to stand in front of him. We don't give up. Not now. We have $93 saved. We have 6 weeks. We can do this. And if we can't, then we fight anyway, because that's what we do. She took his hands. Jonas, I've spent 2 years running from fights I should have stood and fought. I'm done running. We're going to save this ranch, and then we're going to build a life here that no one can take away from us. Jonas looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face. When did you get so fierce? The moment I had something worth fighting for. That night, their first customer arrived. A young ranch wife named Sarah Clemens, who'd heard about Lydia's services from the notice at the general store. She brought a basket full of shirts that needed mending and sheets that needed washing, and Lydia quoted her a fair price that made the woman's eyes widen with relief. "The laundress in town charges twice that," Mrs. Clemens said, "and she's slow as molasses. If you can have these done by week's end, I'll tell all my friends." "They'll be ready," Lydia promised. Word spread faster than wildfire. Within 3 days, Lydia had more work than she could handle: mending, washing, even some sewing of new garments. Women came from ranches miles away, grateful to have someone reliable and affordable. Many of them had heard the gossip about Jonas and his housekeeper, but they cared more about clean laundry than scandal. Jonas, meanwhile, threw himself into every odd job he could find. He chopped and sold firewood, repaired fences for neighboring ranchers, helped with barn raisings and cattle drives. He left before dawn and came home after dark, his hands raw and his body aching, but with money in his pocket. Even Evan contributed. The boy, fully recovered from his illness, helped Lydia sort laundry and keep meticulous records of who owned what. His careful handwriting filled page after page of the ledger Lydia had started, tracking income and expenses with the precision of a born accountant. The days blurred together in a haze of work and worry. Lydia's hands became permanently wrinkled from washing water, her fingers pricked raw from endless mending. Jonas's exhaustion deepened, dark circles forming under his eyes. But every night they counted their earnings and watched the total slowly climb. $100, $120, $150. "We're going to make it," Evan said one evening, studying the ledger with satisfaction. "At this rate, we'll have the money by mid-January." "Don't count your chickens," Jonas warned, but even he looked hopeful. That hope lasted exactly 3 more days. Lydia was hanging laundry in the yard when she saw riders approaching, 3 men on horseback, moving with the casual confidence of people who own the world. She recognized Vernon Price immediately, his gray suit and self-satisfied smile unmistakable. The other 2 were strangers, but they had the look of hired muscle. Jonas appeared from the barn, his jaw tight. "What do you want, Price?" "Just checking on my investment," Vernon said pleasantly. "The bank's investment, I should say. Wanted to see how you're managing with only 3 weeks left until foreclosure." "We'll have your money." "Will you?" Vernon's smile widened. "That's not what I'm hearing. I hear you've been scrambling all over the county, taking odd jobs like a common laborer, and your housekeeper has turned this place into a commercial laundry." He said the word with distaste. "Quite a come-down for a respectable rancher." "There's no shame in honest work," Lydia said, stepping forward. Vernon's eyes slid to her, cold and assessing. "Ah, the famous Mrs. Morin. Or is it Miss? I've heard conflicting reports about whether you're actually a widow. My personal history is none of your concern. It is when you're living unwed with a man who owes my bank a substantial sum." Vernon dismounted, brushing dust from his suit. "You see, there are certain moral clauses in the loan agreement. Conduct unbecoming to the community, bringing disrepute upon the property, that sort of thing." Jonas went very still. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that harboring a woman of questionable character could be grounds for immediate foreclosure, regardless of whether you manage to scrape together the money." Vernon pulled out the loan documents, flipping through them with theatrical precision. "Right here, Section 7, Subsection 3. The borrower agrees to maintain proper moral standards befitting a Christian community. That clause is about keeping brothels and saloons off the property," Jonas said through gritted teeth, "not about who works as my housekeeper. Interpretation is in the eye of the beholder, and as the bank's representative, my interpretation is that your living arrangement is inappropriate." Vernon folded the documents carefully. "Of course there is a solution." "Here it comes," Jonas muttered. "Sell to my buyer now, before foreclosure. He's offering a fair price, enough to cover your debt and leave you a bit extra to start over somewhere else." Papa Vernon's smile was all teeth. "Seems like a better option than losing everything and being branded a degenerate in the process." Lydia felt her fingernails dig into her palms. This man had planned this from the beginning, manufacturing reasons to take the ranch, destroying Jonas's reputation in the process. It was corruption wrapped in respectability, cruelty dressed up as business. "Get off my property," Jonas said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Now, Jonas, I said get off my property, and don't come back unless you have official foreclosure papers signed by a judge." Vernon's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. My buyer is a powerful man. He gets what he wants. One way or another, this ranch will be his. Then he can fight me for it. Jonas took a step forward, and something in his face made Vernon's hired men reach for their guns. But I promise you, it won't be easy. For a tense moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Vernon laughed, a brittle sound. No need for theatrics. We'll settle this the legal way. He remounted his horse. Enjoy your last few weeks here, Jonas. And Mrs. Morin? I'd start packing if I were you. Women like you always land on their feet, or their backs. Jonas lunged, but Lydia caught his arm. He's not worth it. Vernon and his men rode away, their laughter carrying back across the prairie. Jonas stood rigid with fury, every muscle trembling. That bastard, he finally said. That scheming, corrupt bastard. He's trying to provoke you. Don't let him. Lydia released his arm carefully. What did he mean about his buyer getting what he wants? Who is this man? Probably Marcus Dalton. Owns half of Denver, wants to own the other half. Rumor is he's been buying up ranches all through Montana, consolidating land for some kind of cattle empire. Jonas ran a hand through his hair. If Dalton wants this place, he'll use every dirty trick in the book to get it, legal or otherwise. But then we use legal tricks too. We make that payment before the deadline, get everything properly documented, and dare him to take us to court. And the moral clause? Price wasn't making that up. It's in the contract. Lydia's mind raced. There was one solution, but it terrified her more than anything she'd faced since leaving Philadelphia. Still, desperate times called for desperate measures. Then we make our arrangement respectable, she said slowly. We get married. Jonas's head snapped toward her. What? If we're married, there's no moral issue. I'm your wife, not your mistress. Price's interpretation falls apart. She forced herself to meet his eyes. It would be a name only, a business arrangement, just like the housekeeper contract. We could draw up papers, make it legal, and no. Jonas, it's the only way. No. He crossed to her in 3 strides and took her shoulders. If we're getting married, it's not going to be some business arrangement to satisfy a corrupt banker. It's not going to be a sham or a convenience or anything less than real. But we agreed to court, to take our time. Circumstances have changed. His grip gentled. Lydia, I know this is fast. I know you're still healing from what your first husband did to you, but if we're doing this, if we're really going to fight for this life together, then let's do it right. Let's get married because we want to, not because Vernon Price is forcing our hand. Lydia's heart pounded. You're asking me to marry you? Actually marry you? I'm asking you to be my wife, to share my name and my life, and everything that comes with it, the good and the bad. To stand beside me, not as my employee, but as my partner. He paused. But only if that's what you want. I won't trap you into anything. If you'd rather we find another way. Yes. Jonas blinked. Yes? Yes, Sut, I'll marry you. Not because of Vernon Price or the bank or any other reason except that I love you and I can't imagine my life without you in it. Tears stung Lydia's eyes. I'm terrified and it's too fast and I don't know if I'm ready, but I also know that if I wait until I feel ready, I'll wait forever. So yes, I'll marry you. Jonas pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. We'll do this right. A proper wedding with the preacher and witnesses and everything legal. When? This Sunday, before Price can manufacture any more obstacles. Jonas pulled back to look at her. Unless that's too soon. Everything about us has been too soon. Might as well keep the pattern going. Lydia managed a watery laugh. Besides, we need to do this before I lose my nerve. A sound from the porch made them both turn. Evan stood there, his eyes wide, the ledger forgotten in his hands. You're getting married? His voice was small, uncertain. If that's all right with you, Jonas said. Lydia would be your aunt, part of the family officially. Evan looked between them, emotions flickering across his face too fast to name. Then he set down the ledger and walked over to Lydia. You promise you won't leave, even when things get hard? I promise. Even if we lose the ranch? Even then. Evan studied her face as if searching for lies. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him because he suddenly threw his arms around her waist and buried his face against her stomach. "Okay," he said, his voice muffled. "You can marry him, but only if I can help with the wedding." Lydia's hands came up to hold him, her throat too tight for words. Over his head, her eyes met Jonas's, and she saw her own emotions reflected there, fear and hope and love all tangled together. They had 2 weeks to earn enough money to save the ranch. Now they had 3 days to plan a wedding. It should have been impossible. It should have been terrifying. Instead, Lydia felt something close to joy. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of activity that left no time for second thoughts or cold feet. Jonas rode to town that very afternoon and made arrangements with Reverend Samuel Hayes for a Sunday afternoon ceremony. The Reverend, a kind man in his 70s who'd known Jonas since he first came to Montana, asked no awkward questions, just smiled and said he'd be honored to officiate. Lydia, meanwhile, faced a more daunting task, finding something to wear. Her borrowed dress from Sarah was serviceable, but hardly appropriate for a wedding. She had no money for fabric, no time to sew anything elaborate. The solution came from an unexpected source. On Friday afternoon, a wagon pulled into the yard carrying Maggie Crowder, whose ranch lay 10 miles to the north. Maggie was a widow herself. Her husband had died 5 years back, leaving her to run their cattle operation alone. She was in her 40s, solid as an oak tree, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Heard you're getting hitched on Sunday," she said without preamble, climbing down from the wagon. "Also heard you don't have a proper dress." "News travels fast," Lydia said warily. She'd met Maggie only once, when Jonas had taken her around to meet the neighboring ranchers. The woman had been polite, but distant. "In these parts, news is our entertainment." Maggie went to the back of her wagon and pulled out a large trunk. "Brought you some options. Used to belong to my daughter before she moved to California. She won't be needing them anymore." Inside the trunk were 3 beautiful dresses, not fancy, but well-made and lovely. One was a soft blue wool, another a deep green cotton, and the third was cream-colored silk with tiny pearl buttons. "I can't accept these," Lydia protested. "They're too valuable." "You can, and you will. Consider it a wedding present." Maggie's stern expression softened slightly. "Look, I know what people in town are saying about you and Jonas, that you're a gold digger, or worse. But I know Jonas Hale. He's got more integrity in his little finger than Vernon Price has in his whole body. If Jonas chose you, then you must be worth choosing." Lydia's eyes stung. "Thank you. That means more than you know." "Don't thank me yet. I'm here for another reason, too." Maggie glanced toward the house, then lowered her voice. "I know about the trouble with the bank, about Price trying to steal this place out from under Jonas, and I want you to know you've got allies. Me, Tom Henderson from the Bar H, the Carsons, even old Jim Wilkes, who never liked anybody. We've all had run-ins with Price and his crooked schemes. If you need help, you ask." "We're managing. I can see you're managing. Heard about the laundry business, about Jonas working himself to death on odd jobs. But there are other kinds of help." Maggie's expression turned serious. "Marcus Dalton, the buyer Price mentioned, he's bad news. He doesn't just buy ranches, he drives people off them. Accidents happen, fences get cut, cattle go missing. If Dalton decides he wants your place, things could get dangerous." A chill ran down Lydia's spine. "Are you saying someone might try to hurt us?" "I'm saying you should be prepared. Lock your doors at night, keep a gun handy, and if anything suspicious happens, anything at all, you send word. We'll come running." Maggie squeezed Lydia's shoulder. "You're one of us now. That means something out here." After Maggie left, Lydia carried the trunk inside and tried on the dresses. The cream silk fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. She was standing in front of the mirror, hardly recognizing herself, when Jonas came in from the barn. He stopped dead in the doorway. "Lydia." Her name came out reverent. "You look like a bride?" She turned slowly, self-conscious. "Mrs. Crowder brought it. She said, 'Jonas, she warned me about Marcus Dalton, about things getting dangerous.'" Jonas's expression darkened. "I was afraid of that." "You knew?" "Suspected. Dalton's reputation precedes him. He's got men on his payroll who'll do anything for money. Jonas crossed the room and took her hands. But we're not backing down. We'll take precautions. I'll teach you how to shoot properly. We'll keep the rifles loaded and we'll stay alert. But we're not letting fear drive us off our own land. Maggie said we have allies, other ranchers who've dealt with Price's schemes. That's good to know. Means if trouble comes, we won't be facing it alone. Jonas lifted one of her hands and kissed it gently. But let's not borrow worry from tomorrow. We've got a wedding to prepare for, and you look so beautiful in that dress that I can barely remember what I came in here to say. Despite her anxiety, Lydia smiled. What did you come in here to say? That I love you. And that Sunday can't come fast enough. Saturday passed in a blur of last-minute preparations. Jonas slaughtered one of their hens for Sunday dinner, and Lydia baked 3 pies with the last of their apple preserves. Evan helped clean the house from top to bottom, taking his responsibilities as ring-bearer with endearing seriousness. That evening, as Lydia was putting away laundry, she found Jonas in the barn, staring at nothing. Having second thoughts? She asked softly. Never. He turned to her. But I want you to know, tomorrow, when we say those vows, I mean every word. For better or worse, richer or poorer, all of it. You understand that? I understand. Lydia moved closer. I mean them too. I'm not marrying you out of convenience or fear. I'm marrying you because you're the best man I've ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you. Worthy? Jonas looked stunned. Lydia, you've got it backward. You're the one who's too good for me. You walked into a broken house with a broken man and a traumatized child, and somehow you put us all back together. You gave me hope when I'd forgotten what it felt like. You gave Evan a reason to smile again. How could you possibly think you need to prove anything? Lydia couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Instead, she went up on her toes and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into that kiss, gratitude and love and promise and hope. Tomorrow, they would stand before God and community and pledge their lives to each other. Tomorrow, they would become a family in law as well as in heart. But tonight, they stood in the dim barn with hay dust floating in the lamplight and held each other like drowning people holding on to life itself. Sunday dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to promise good things. Lydia dressed carefully in the cream silk, her hands trembling as she fastened the tiny pearl buttons. She'd washed her hair the night before, and it fell in soft waves down her back. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back, no longer the hollow-eyed scarecrow who'd stumbled off that train, but someone with color in her cheeks and light in her eyes. Someone who looked happy. Evan appeared in her doorway, scrubbed clean and wearing his best clothes. You look pretty, he said shyly. Thank you. So do you. Lydia straightened his collar. Are you ready for this? I think so. Uncle Jonas is nervous. Is he? He's been pacing in his room for an hour, and he tried to shave twice but kept cutting himself. Evan grinned. I've never seen him nervous before. Lydia couldn't help but smile. Well, getting married is a big thing. It's all right to be nervous. Are you nervous? Terrified. But you still want to do it? More than anything. Lydia held out her hand. Come on, let's go get me married. They rode to town in the wagon, Jonas driving, Lydia beside him, and Evan in the back. The church was small and white, its steeple pointing toward heaven like a prayer made solid. A handful of wagons were already there, which surprised Lydia. I didn't think anyone would come, she murmured. Small towns, Jonas said. People love a wedding, even if they disapprove of the couple. But when they entered the church, Lydia realized Jonas was wrong. The people gathered there weren't disapproving townspeople looking for gossip. They were the ranching families she'd met over the past weeks. Maggie Crowder, the Hendersons, the Carsons, Jim Wilkes, and even young Sarah Clemens with her husband. People who'd hired her for laundry, who'd given Jonas work, who'd shown them kindness. Their allies, Maggie had called them. And looking at their weathered faces and genuine smiles, Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. They came, she whispered to Jonas. They came for you, he corrected, because you've earned their respect. Reverend Hayes stood at the front, his Bible open, his expression kind. Are we ready? Jonas took Lydia's hand. We're ready. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. Lydia barely heard the traditional words, too focused on Jonas's face, on the intensity in his blue eyes, the way his voice never wavered when he promised to love and cherish her. When it was her turn to speak, her voice shook but held firm. I, Lydia Morin, take you, Jonas Hal, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. The words felt like a vow and a prayer, and a promise, all wrapped into one. Evan presented the rings, simple gold bands Jonas had purchased in town. As Jonas slid the ring onto Lydia's finger, she felt something shift inside her chest. This was real. This was forever. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Hayes said with satisfaction. Jonas, you may kiss your bride. And Jonas did, gentle and reverent, as if she were something precious he'd been entrusted to protect. When they broke apart, the small congregation applauded, and Lydia found herself laughing through tears. They signed the marriage certificate with Maggie and Tom Henderson as witnesses, making everything legal and binding. Mrs. Jonas Hale, Lydia wrote carefully, and the name felt right in a way Mrs. David Morin never had. The ranching families had brought food for a wedding feast, and they all gathered in the church hall for an impromptu celebration. It wasn't fancy, just good food and better company, but it was perfect. People offered congratulations and advice, shared stories about their own weddings, and welcomed Lydia into the community with a warmth that made her eyes sting. You done good, Maggie said, pulling Lydia aside. Jonas is a lucky man. I'm the lucky one. That's how it should be, both people feeling lucky. Maggie glanced toward where Jonas was talking with Tom Henderson. But keep your guard up. I heard Vernon Price is furious about the marriage. Says it won't change anything, that he'll still find a way to take the ranch. Lydia's happiness dimmed. Let him try. We'll have the money by the deadline. I hope so, but if you don't, if something happens, you remember what I said. You've got friends now. Use them. They left the celebration as the sun was setting, driving home through the golden afternoon light. Evan fell asleep in the back of the wagon, exhausted from excitement. Jonas drove one-handed, his other hand finding Lydia's and holding tight. Happy? He asked. Happier than I ever thought I could be. She squeezed his hand. Scared too. We still have the bank payment hanging over us, and Maggie said Price is angry. Tomorrow, we worry about Price and the bank. Tonight, Jonas glanced back at sleeping Evan, then at Lydia with a look that made her breath catch. Tonight, we celebrate being married. They reached the ranch as twilight was falling. Jonas carried Evan inside and put him to bed while Lydia lit lamps throughout the house. When Jonas came back downstairs, he found her standing in the middle of the kitchen, looking uncertain. I don't know how this works, she admitted. This being married thing. I mean, I was married before, but that was... She trailed off. That was different, Jonas finished. He crossed to her slowly. This is different. We figure it out together. No expectations, no pressure. We go at whatever pace feels right. What feels right to you? Jonas cupped her face in his hands. This, he said, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. And this, he continued, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her close. And maybe, he added with a hint of humor in his voice, carrying my wife up to our bedroom, if that's all right with her. Lydia's face heated, but she nodded. That would be all right. Jonas scooped her up effortlessly, and Lydia wrapped her arms around his neck as he carried her up the stairs. Her heart pounded with anticipation and nervousness in equal measure, but underneath both was something solid and sure. Trust. She trusted this man with her life, her heart, her future. Whatever happened next, whether they saved the ranch or lost it, whether they had easy times or hard, they would face it together. And that was enough. The night that followed was gentle and unhurried, nothing like the brutal encounters Lydia remembered from her first marriage. Jonas was patient, asking permission with every touch, stopping whenever she tensed, holding her when she cried from the overwhelming emotion of being treated with such care. By the time exhaustion finally claimed them both, Lydia felt as if something broken inside her had begun to heal. She woke in the early hours to find Jonas watching her, his expression tender in the moonlight. "Can't sleep?" she murmured. "Don't want to." His finger traced her cheekbone. "Want to remember this. The first night with my wife in my arms. The first day of our life together." Lydia snuggled closer, her head on his chest, his heartbeat steady under her ear. "We're really married. We're really married. And we have 2 weeks to save the ranch. We'll make it. How can you be so sure?" "Because I've got you," Jonas said simply. "And you're the stubbornest woman I've ever met. If sheer determination could pay off debts, we'd be rich." Lydia laughed softly. "Stubborn, am I?" "Extremely. It's one of the things I love about you." His arms tightened around her. "Sleep now. Tomorrow, we keep fighting." Lydia closed her eyes, safe and warm in her husband's embrace, and let sleep take her. Whatever challenges tomorrow brought, they would face them as they'd faced everything else, together. But neither of them could have predicted just how dangerous those challenges would become. The trouble started 4 days later, on a night when Jonas was helping a neighboring rancher deliver a difficult calf. Lydia and Evan were alone at the ranch, finishing dinner, when they heard horses approaching. Not the single horse of a neighbor dropping by, multiple horses, moving fast. Lydia's heart jumped into her throat. She ran to the window and saw them. 3 riders, their faces hidden by bandanas, approaching the barn. "Evan, upstairs, now. Lock yourself in your room and don't come out no matter what you hear. But now!" The boy ran. Lydia's hand shook as she grabbed the rifle from above the fireplace. Jonas had taught her to shoot just last week, though she'd never imagined actually needing to. She checked that it was loaded, then positioned herself by the front window. The riders reached the barn and dismounted. One pulled out a torch. They were going to burn it down. Lydia threw open the front door and fired a warning shot into the air. "Get off this property!" The men spun around, surprised to find a woman with a gun. For a moment they seemed to hesitate. Then one of them laughed. "Just a woman," he called to his companions. "Hale must be gone. This'll be easy." They advanced on the house. Lydia's mouth went dry, but she raised the rifle to her shoulder the way Jonas had taught her. "I'll shoot the first man who comes closer. I swear I will." "You won't shoot nobody, lady." The leader kept coming. "You're shaking so hard you couldn't hit." Lydia pulled the trigger. The bullet hit the dirt 2 feet in front of the man, close enough to make him jump back. She worked the lever action, chambering another round. "The next one won't miss," she said, her voice steadier than her hands. "Now get off my property before I put a hole in you." The men exchanged glances. Then, to Lydia's horror, they split up. 2 heading for the barn, 1 circling toward the back of the house. She couldn't shoot them all. She couldn't defend every direction at once. The man at the barn lit his torch. Flames reflected off the red paint as he prepared to throw it. Lydia made a decision. She ran to the back door, threw it open, and fired at the circling man. She missed, but the shot made him dive for cover. Then she ran back to the front. The torch arced through the air toward the barn. A gunshot rang out, not from Lydia's rifle, but from somewhere in the darkness beyond the house. The torchbearer went down, clutching his shoulder. More shots followed, coming from multiple directions. The rustlers scrambled for their horses as bullets kicked up dust around them. One of them returned fire blindly. Then all 3 were mounted and galloping away into the night. Lydia stood frozen in the doorway, her rifle still raised, unable to process what had just happened. Riders emerged from the darkness, Maggie Crowder in the lead, followed by Tom Henderson, Jim Wilkes, and 2 of the Carson boys. They all carried rifles. "Everyone all right?" Maggie called, dismounting. Yes. How did you—" "Been keeping watch since the wedding. Knew something like this might happen." Maggie strode past Lydia into the house. "Where's the boy?" "Upstairs, locked in his room." Lydia's legs suddenly wouldn't hold her. She sank onto the porch steps, her whole body shaking. Tom Henderson went to check the barn while the Carson boys rode after the fleeing rustlers to make sure they kept going. Maggie came back out with Evan, who ran to Lydia and threw his arms around her. "You were so brave," he whispered. "You protected us." Lydia held him tight, unable to speak past the terror still flooding her system. Jonas arrived 20 minutes later, his horse lathered from a hard ride. Someone had gone to fetch him. He took one look at Lydia's white face and Evan's tear-stained one and went pale himself. What happened? Maggie filled him in while Jonas pulled Lydia and Evan into his arms, holding them both as if he'd never let go. This was Dalton, Jonas said when Maggie finished. Had to be. He's trying to drive us off. Most likely, Maggie agreed. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Whatever I have to, said. Jonas's voice was granite. This is my land, my family. Nobody's taking them from me. The neighbors stayed the rest of the night, keeping watch in shifts. Nothing else happened, but Lydia couldn't sleep. She kept seeing that torch arcing toward the barn, kept feeling the kick of the rifle against her shoulder, kept hearing that man's laughter when he realized she was alone. She'd been so close to losing everything. As dawn broke, Jonas came to find her in the kitchen, where she'd been making coffee with shaking hands. Lydia. He took the pot from her before she could drop it. You're safe. We're all safe. But for how long? If they come back with more men, they won't. He pulled her close. Because we're not going to be alone anymore. Maggie's organizing the ranchers. They'll take turns keeping watch until this is settled. I can't ask people to risk their lives for us. You're not asking. We're all in this together. Dalton's been pushing ranchers around for years. If we let him drive you out, we're next. So we stand together. Jonas tilted her face up. But I need to know you can handle this, because it might get worse before it gets better. And if you want to leave, if you want to take Evan somewhere safe until this is over, I'll understand. Lydia pulled back to look at him. Do you remember what I said in my vows? For better or for worse? Lydia, I'm not leaving. This is my home. You're my husband. Evan is... She glanced toward where the boy sat at the table, looking small and scared. He's mine to protect. We're a family, and families don't abandon each other when things get hard. Jonas's eyes shone with something that looked like tears. I don't deserve you. Yes, you do, and I deserve you. She straightened her shoulders. Now, let's figure out how to end this, once and for all. The answer came from an unexpected source. That afternoon, a rider arrived from town, not a rancher or a neighbor, but Edwin Marsh, the lawyer who'd drawn up Lydia's employment contract. He looked agitated, his normally neat appearance disheveled. I need to speak with you, he said without preamble. Both of you, privately. They settled in this kitchen while Evan went to help Maggie with the horses. Mr. Marsh pulled out a stack of papers, his hands shaking slightly. I've been going over your loan documents, he said. The originals, not the copies Vernon Price has been showing you. And I found something, several somethings actually. Jonas leaned forward. What kind of somethings? Forgeries? Alterations? The interest rate Price claims you agreed to? That's been changed. Someone altered the original contract after you signed it. Same with the payment schedule and these moral clauses he keeps citing. They were added later. Lydia's pulse quickened. Can you prove it? I can. I have the original documents, filed with the county. When I compare them to Price's copies, the forgeries are obvious. Different ink, different handwriting for the numbers. Mr. Marsh looked between them. This is fraud. Criminal fraud. If I take this to the territorial judge, Price will claim it's a mistake, Jonas said, his word against ours. Not just his word, Marcus Dalton's word too. They're in this together. Price manufactures the fraudulent foreclosures, and Dalton buys the properties for a fraction of their value. They've been doing it all over Montana. Mr. Marsh set his jaw. But I can stop them, if you're willing to fight this in court. How long would that take? Lydia asked. Weeks, maybe months. And during that time, Price will keep coming after you. He might even accelerate the foreclosure. Jonas and Lydia exchanged glances. They'd worked so hard, scraped together every penny. They were close, so close to having the money. But if Price accelerated the foreclosure, timing wouldn't matter. What if we had the money? Jonas asked. All of it, before the deadline. Could he still foreclose? Not legally. Once the debt is paid, the loan is satisfied, but he could still try to claim you violated other terms. Let him try. Lydia stood, her mind made up. We pay the debt. We get proof of payment from the bank itself, not Price. And then if he tries anything else, we take him to court with your evidence of fraud. That's risky, Mr. Marsh warned. "You'd be exposing him, making him desperate. Desperate men do dangerous things." "He's already sent men to burn down our barn," Jonas said. "How much more desperate can he get?" Mr. Marsh had no answer for that. After the lawyer left, Lydia and Jonas sat at the kitchen table and counted their money one more time. Between the horses, the odd jobs, and the laundry business, they'd scraped together $243. Combined with the $40 Lydia had saved, they had $283. They needed $300, $17 short. "We could sell more horses," Jonas said, but his voice lacked conviction. They'd already sold the only animals they could spare. "Or take out the payment in installments. Price won't accept installments. He wants the full amount or nothing." They sat in heavy silence, so close to salvation, but still just out of reach. Then Evan spoke from the doorway. "I have money." They both turned. The boy stood there, clutching a small wooden box. "What money?" Jonas asked gently. "From Mama and Papa. Before they died, Mama gave me this. Said it was for emergencies." He opened the box to reveal a handful of coins and bills. "I counted it once. It's $23. Jonas shook his head immediately. "Evan, no. That's your inheritance. Your parents wanted you to have it." "For emergencies," Evan repeated. "And this is an emergency, isn't it? If we lose the ranch, I lose my home. I lose you and Lydia. The money doesn't matter if we have nowhere to use it." He crossed to the table and set down the box. "Please, let me help save our home." Lydia's vision blurred with tears. This brave, broken boy who'd already lost so much, offering up the last piece of his parents without hesitation. Jonas pulled Evan into a fierce hug. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Evan's voice was muffled against Jonas's shoulder. "We're a family. Families help each other." So they took the money, $23 that smelled like ash and grief and hope, and added it to their carefully saved pile. $306. They had enough. The next morning, Jonas and Lydia rode to town together, the money secured in a locked box, Mr. Marsh's horse beside theirs. They'd left Evan at the ranch with Maggie and Tom, both armed and alert. The bank was a squat brick building on Main Street. Vernon Price sat behind his desk, looking smug when they entered. His smile faded when he saw Mr. Marsh. "What's he doing here?" "Witnessing," Jonas said. He set the locked box on Price's desk. "I'm here to pay my debt, in full. $300, as specified in the original loan agreement." Price's expression darkened. "The amount has gone up. Interest and late fees." "The original agreement specifies a fixed interest rate," Mr. Marsh interrupted, "which means the amount owed is exactly $300, not a penny more. I'll need to verify." "We'll wait." Jonas crossed his arms. For a tense moment, Price looked like he might refuse. Then he seemed to remember they were in a public bank, with other customers watching. He opened the box with jerky movements, counting the money twice. His face grew redder with each bill. "Fine," he finally spat. "The debt is paid, but don't think this is over, Hale. There are other ways to—" "Careful," Mr. Marsh said quietly. "Making threats in front of witnesses could be considered intimidation, especially when I have evidence of fraud in the original loan documents." He pulled out a paper. "I'll need a receipt. Showing the debt is paid in full, the property lien is released, and Mr. and Mrs. Hale have clear title to their land, signed and dated." Price looked like he'd swallowed a wasp, but he wrote out the receipt, his handwriting angry and sharp. Jonas took it, folded it carefully, and put it in his pocket. "Pleasure doing business with you," he said, and walked out. They made it halfway down the street before Lydia started shaking. "We did it! We actually did it! We did!" Jonas pulled her against him, right there in the middle of Main Street, and kissed her soundly. "We saved our home." Around them, people stopped and stared. Let them stare, Lydia thought. Let them gossip. She'd just fought for and won the life she wanted, and she wasn't going to apologize for celebrating it. Mr. Marsh cleared his throat delicately. "I hate to interrupt, but I'd suggest you file that receipt with the county clerk immediately, and I'll be submitting my evidence of fraud to the territorial judge. Vernon Price's days of stealing ranches are over." They filed the papers, making everything legal and permanent. Then they rode home, exhausted and triumphant, to find Evan waiting on the porch. "Did we do it?" he called out. Did we save the ranch? We did, Lydia called back. We're safe, it's ours. Evan let out a whoop and ran to meet them, and Jonas scooped him up, swinging him around while the boy laughed. Maggie and Tom emerged from the barn, grinning, and suddenly everyone was celebrating, these battle-scarred people who'd fought together and won. That night, after the neighbors had gone home and Evan was asleep, Jonas and Lydia stood on the porch looking out at their land. Their home. Bought and paid for with blood, sweat, tears, and every ounce of courage they'd possessed. It's really over, Lydia said. The fight for the ranch is over, Jonas corrected. But our life together? That's just beginning. He was right, Lydia thought, leaning against her husband's solid warmth. They'd won this battle, saved this home, built this family from nothing. Whatever came next, whether easy times or hard, they would face it the same way they'd faced everything else. Together. And that made them unbeatable. But the celebration was short-lived. 3 nights later, Lydia woke to Jonas shaking her shoulder, his hand clamped over her mouth to keep her from crying out. Someone's outside, he whispered. Stay here with Evan. Lock the door behind me. Before she could protest, he was gone, rifle in hand, moving down the stairs with the silence of a hunting cat. Lydia's heart hammered as she threw on her robe and crept to Evan's room. The boy was already awake, his eyes wide in the darkness. Not again, he whispered. Shh, come with me. She brought him to her room and positioned them away from the window, her own rifle across her lap. Through the glass, she could see shadows moving near the barn. More than one, less than 10. Moonlight caught the glint of metal, guns. A shot rang out, shattering the night. Then another. Lydia's breath stopped as she waited for Jonas to return fire, to give some sign he was alive. The silence stretched so long she thought her heart might burst from her chest. Then she heard Jonas's voice, calm and deadly. I've got 2 rifles trained on you from 2 different angles. You take one more step toward that barn and you're dead men. We're here on Mr. Dalton's orders, an unfamiliar voice called back. This property belongs to him now. Like hell it does. I've got a receipt showing the debt is paid in full. This ranch is mine, legally purchased and defended. Now get off my land before I start shooting. Dalton doesn't care about receipts. He wants this land, and he's going to get it, one way or another. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Lydia saw Jonas shift position, moving closer to the house. He was outnumbered, and he knew it. She made a decision. Evan, stay down and don't move. Lydia grabbed her rifle and ran for the stairs. She positioned herself at the front door, threw it open, and fired a shot into the air. That's my husband you're threatening, she called out, her voice carrying across the yard. And you're surrounded. We've got neighbors watching this place day and night. They heard those shots. They're coming. So you can leave now on your own horses, or you can leave later in a pine box. Your choice. It was a bluff. The neighbors had stopped their constant patrols after the debt was paid, but the men didn't know that. She heard them muttering among themselves, uncertainty in their voices. Then, like a prayer answered, Lydia heard the thunder of approaching hoofbeats, lots of them. Maggie Crowder rode into the yard at the head of 6 armed riders, her rifle already raised. Heard shots? Figured you might need backup. The intruders broke and ran, scrambling for their horses. Within seconds they were gone, swallowed by darkness. Jonas emerged from behind the well, his face grim. They'll be back. Dalton's not going to stop just because we paid off the bank. Then we make him stop, Maggie said, dismounting. She looked different somehow, harder, more dangerous. I've been doing some asking around. Dalton's got friends in the territorial government, but he's also got enemies. Ranchers he's pushed around, politicians he's crossed. And I know someone who might be able to help. Who? Lydia asked, still clutching her rifle. Judge Morrison. He's the circuit judge, handles cases from here to Helena. He's also the one who signed off on half of Dalton's fraudulent foreclosures before he realized what was happening. He's been looking for a way to take Dalton down ever since. Maggie's smile was sharp as a knife. I think we just gave him the ammunition he needs. 2 days later, they rode to Helena, Jonas, Lydia, Maggie, and Mr. Marsh, leaving Evan safely behind with Tom Henderson and a small army of armed neighbors. The journey took a full day, and Lydia spent most of it watching the horizon for signs of trouble. Helena was bigger than Sweetwater, a real city with brick buildings and paved streets. Judge Morrison's office was in the territorial courthouse, an imposing structure that made Lydia feel small and out of place. But the judge himself was surprisingly approachable, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a steel backbone. He listened to their story without interruption, studying the documents Mr. Marsh had brought. "This is damning evidence," he said finally. "Forgery, fraud, conspiracy. If I can prove Dalton's involvement, I can shut down his entire operation." "If?" Jonas leaned forward. "Your Honor, the man sent armed thugs to our ranch twice. He's trying to drive us off land we own free and clear." "I believe you, Mr. Hale. But belief isn't evidence. I need proof of Dalton's direct involvement. Otherwise, he'll claim these were rogue employees acting without his knowledge." Judge Morrison tapped the documents thoughtfully. "However, Vernon Price is another matter. We have clear evidence of his fraud. If I can get Price to testify against Dalton in exchange for leniency—" "You think he'd turn on Dalton?" Maggie asked skeptically. "I think Vernon Price is a coward who'll do whatever it takes to save his own skin." The judge smiled grimly. "Let me have a conversation with Mr. Price. In the meantime, I'm issuing an order of protection. If anyone, and I mean anyone, threatens or harasses you, they'll answer to me personally. And I'm fast-tracking the fraud investigation. With any luck, we'll have Dalton in chains by month's end." It was more than Lydia had dared hope for. They left the courthouse with the protection order clutched in Jonas's hand, a piece of paper that suddenly made them untouchable. The ride home should have been triumphant. Instead, Lydia felt a growing unease she couldn't name. "Something's wrong," she said as they approached the ranch at dusk. Jonas had felt it too. She could see it in the tension of his shoulders. They urged the horses faster, and as they crested the final hill, Lydia's worst fears materialized. Smoke rose from the direction of the ranch, not the friendly smoke of a cooking fire, but thick black columns that spoke of destruction. "No." The word tore from Jonas's throat. He kicked his horse into a gallop. The house still stood, thank God. But the barn, their beautiful red barn, was engulfed in flames. Neighbors were forming bucket brigades from the well, desperately trying to save the structure, but it was already too late. The roof collapsed inward with a roar, sending sparks spiraling into the evening sky. Jonas was off his horse before it stopped moving, running toward the inferno. Tom Henderson caught him. "The animals are out. Everyone's safe. Jonas, listen to me. The animals are out." Jonas sagged with relief, then straightened with fury. "Who did this?" "Don't know. Happened about an hour ago. We were in the house with Evan when we smelled smoke. By the time we got out here, the whole barn was ablaze." Tom's face was grim. "This was deliberate, Jonas. Someone poured accelerant. We could smell the kerosene." Lydia ran to the house and found Evan inside with Mrs. Henderson, both of them safe but shaken. She pulled the boy into her arms, feeling him tremble. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have seen them. I should have stopped them." "This isn't your fault, you hear me? This is Dalton's doing, only his." Outside, the barn continued to burn, and with it went years of Jonas's work. His tools, his stored hay, his workshop. Lydia watched her husband's face as he stared at the flames, saw something in him harden into granite. "This ends now," Jonas said quietly. "I don't care what it takes. This ends now." But ending it proved more complicated than any of them anticipated. The next morning brought a visitor, Marshal Tom Bridger, the territorial marshal investigating Dalton's activities. He was a lean man with observant eyes and a reputation for being incorruptible. "Judge Morrison sent me," he said, surveying the smoking ruins of the barn. "Said you might need federal help. Looks like he was right." Jonas walked him through everything: the forced debt, the forgeries, the attacks, the arson. Marshal Bridger took notes and asked pointed questions. "Here's the situation," he said when Jonas finished. "I've been building a case against Marcus Dalton for 2 years, but he's careful, insulates himself with layers of employees and shell companies. Every time we get close, witnesses disappear or evidence vanishes." He paused. "But this is sloppy, desperate, and desperate men make mistakes." "What do you need from us?" Lydia asked. "Bait." The marshal's eyes were apologetic. "I need you to stay here, act like you're vulnerable. Dalton thinks he's winning, thinks he can break you through intimidation. If we let him think that, he might get bold enough to make a move we can actually prove." "You want to use us as bait?" Jonas's voice was dangerous. With my wife and nephew in the house? I'll have men stationed around your property. You'll be protected at all times. But yes, essentially, I need Dalton to come after you one more time. And when he does, we'll be ready. Lydia and Jonas exchanged glances. It was risky, terrifyingly risky, but it might also be their only chance to end this permanently. How long? Jonas asked. A week? Maybe 2. Dalton's getting impatient. He'll move soon. And if he doesn't? If he just waits us out? Then we try something else. But I don't think he'll wait. Men like Dalton, they can't stand defiance. Every day you stay on this land is an insult to him. He'll come. They agreed, though it made Lydia's stomach churn with anxiety. For the next week, they lived in a state of constant vigilance. Marshal Bridger's men were invisible but present, watching from the hills, patrolling the perimeter, waiting. Life went on with a surreal quality. Lydia cooked and cleaned and took in laundry. Jonas began the work of rebuilding the barn with help from neighbors. Evan studied his lessons and tried to act normal, but underneath it all was the knowledge that they were being hunted, that danger could come at any moment. The waiting was almost worse than the attacks. It was Lydia who noticed the stranger first. A man had been coming to town regularly, asking questions about the Hale Ranch. He claimed to be a cattle buyer, but something about him didn't sit right with Lydia. He had cold eyes and hands that had never done manual labor. She mentioned it to Marshal Bridger, who investigated. The cattle buyer was actually one of Dalton's enforcers, a man with a reputation for making problems disappear permanently. He's the trigger, Bridger said grimly. Dalton's brought in a professional, which means he's planning something big. What do we do? Jonas demanded. We watch him. We wait for him to make his move, and when he does, we take him down and make him testify against Dalton. The marshal checked his pistol. It happens soon. Maybe tonight. Maybe tomorrow. But soon. That night, Lydia couldn't sleep. She lay in bed beside Jonas, listening to him breathe, trying to memorize the sound. If things went wrong tomorrow, if Dalton's man was as dangerous as they feared, this might be their last peaceful night together. I can hear you thinking, Jonas murmured in the darkness. I'm scared. Me too. Lydia rolled over to face him. In the moonlight filtering through the curtains, she could see his profile, strong and familiar, and infinitely dear. If something happens to me tomorrow, nothing's going to happen to you. But if it does, I need you to know that these past months have been the happiest of my life. That you saved me in every way a person can be saved. That I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Jonas pulled her close, his arms tight around her. If something happens to either of us, Evan goes to Maggie. She's agreed to take him. He'll be safe and loved. You've already arranged it? Had to, in case. His voice was rough. But nothing's going to happen. We're going to get through tomorrow, and Dalton's going to jail, and we're going to live a long, boring life raising cattle and children. You hear me? Children? Lydia pulled back to look at him. We've never talked about children. Haven't we? Jonas's hand found her stomach, resting there gently. I've thought about it. About a little girl with your eyes and your stubborn chin. About Evan teaching his younger siblings to read. About filling this house with life and noise and chaos. He paused. That is, if you want. I want, Lydia said fiercely. I want all of it. The boring life, the children, the chaos. I want to grow old with you and die in your arms when we're 90. She kissed him with everything she had. So let's make sure we survive tomorrow. They made love with a desperate tenderness, holding each other as if they could prevent the dawn from coming through sheer force of will. And when exhaustion finally claimed them, they fell asleep tangled together, two people who'd found each other against all odds and refused to let go. The attack came at dawn. Lydia woke to the sound of breaking glass. She had time to register that Jonas was already moving, grabbing his rifle, before the first shot rang out. Stay down, Jonas roared. Evan, stay in your room. More shots coming from multiple directions. Lydia scrambled for her own rifle, her hands shaking. This was different from the previous attacks. More coordinated, more aggressive. These men weren't trying to scare them off. They were trying to kill them. Jonas fired from the bedroom window, then ducked as return fire splintered the frame. There's too many of them. Where the hell is Bridger? Lydia ran to the hallway and nearly collided with Evan. The boy's face was white but determined, and he held a pistol Jonas had taught him to shoot. "I can help," he said. "You can keep yourself alive," Lydia corrected, pushing him back toward his room. "Get under the bed and don't come out until—" An explosion rocked the house. The front door blew inward in a shower of wood and smoke. Men poured through the opening, 3 of them, armed with rifles and moving like soldiers. Lydia raised her rifle and fired without thinking. One of the men went down. She worked the lever action and fired again, driving the others back. But more were coming. She could hear them outside, surrounding the house. "Upstairs hall," Jonas shouted. "Defensive position." They retreated up the stairs, Jonas covering their backs, Lydia half-dragging Evan, all of them firing when they could. They made it to the landing, and Jonas overturned a heavy bureau, creating a barricade. "How many?" Lydia gasped, reloading with trembling fingers. 6, maybe 8. All armed, all professionals. Jonas's face was grim. Dalton sent his whole crew. He's not playing around this time. Below, the intruders were regrouping. Lydia could hear them arguing, planning their assault. Where were the marshal's men? Where was their backup? Then she heard a new voice, cultured and cold. "Jonas Hale, I'm giving you one chance to surrender. Come out peacefully, sign over the deed to this property, and I'll let your family live." "Marcus Dalton," Jonas breathed. The bastard came himself. "Is that supposed to make this better?" Dalton called up. "I assure you my patience is not infinite. You have 1 minute to decide. Then my men come up those stairs, and I stop caring about collateral damage." Jonas looked at Lydia, and she saw the calculation in his eyes. He was considering it, considering trading himself for their lives. "Don't you dare," she whispered. "Don't you dare give up after everything we've fought for. If it saves you and Evan, it won't. Men like Dalton don't leave witnesses." Lydia gripped his arm. "We fight, together, like we've done everything else." Evan pressed himself against Lydia's side. "I'm not leaving either. We're a family. Families stick together." Jonas's jaw worked. Then he nodded once and raised his voice. "Here's my answer, Dalton. Go to hell." "Very well. Gentlemen, if you please." The assault began. Men charged up the stairs, and Jonas and Lydia fired until their rifles were empty, then grabbed pistols and kept firing. Bodies fell, but more kept coming. The hallway filled with smoke and noise and terror. Lydia lost track of time. Everything narrowed to loading, aiming, firing, to keeping Evan behind her, to staying alive 1 second at a time. She was reaching for more ammunition when she realized the firing had stopped. Not because they'd won, but because they were out of bullets. Jonas realized it at the same moment. He dropped his empty pistol and pulled out his hunting knife, positioning himself between Lydia and the stairs. "Get Evan into the bedroom. Barricade the door." "Jonas! Do it now!" 2 men appeared at the top of the stairs, rifles raised. Jonas tensed to charge them, to buy his family a few more seconds, when gunfire erupted from a new direction. The intruders spun around, confused. As bullets tore through them from behind, they fell. And suddenly the stairway was full of new men, Marshal Bridger and his deputies, firing with deadly precision. The fight was brutal and short. Dalton's men, caught between Jonas's barricade and the marshal's assault, had nowhere to go. Within minutes, it was over. The survivors surrendered, and Bridger's men were putting them in chains. Lydia sagged against the wall, her legs finally giving out. It was over. They'd survived. Jonas pulled her and Evan into his arms, and the 3 of them clung to each other, shaking with relief and delayed terror. Marshal Bridger appeared at the top of the stairs, his face apologetic. "I'm sorry we cut it so close. Dalton's men had lookouts posted. They delayed us, but we got here." "Is Dalton alive and in custody, along with 6 of his men?" Bridger smiled grimly. "And they're all singing like birds, trying to cut deals. We've got enough testimony to put Dalton away for the rest of his natural life. It's over, Mr. Hale. It's really over." The house was a disaster. Windows shattered, walls riddled with bullet holes, blood staining the floors. But standing in the middle of the wreckage with her husband's arms around her and Evan safe against her side, Lydia felt nothing but overwhelming gratitude. They were alive. They were together. They'd won. The next weeks were a blur of testimony and trials and endless questions. Marcus Dalton was sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison for fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, and a dozen other charges. Vernon Price turned state's evidence and got a lighter sentence, but his career was over, his reputation destroyed. The ranchers Dalton had victimized began the long process of reclaiming their land. Judge Morrison personally oversaw each case, ensuring justice was done, and slowly the territory began to heal from Dalton's corruption. For Lydia and Jonas, healing meant different things. They rebuilt the barn, this time with help from every rancher within 50 miles. The whole community turned out for the barn raising, and by the end of the day, they had a structure even better than the original. Lydia stood watching as the last board was nailed into place and felt tears of gratitude slip down her cheeks. "Why are you crying?" Evan asked, slipping his hand into hers. "Because I'm happy. Because we're home. Because we're safe." "Are we really safe? Will bad men come again?" "Maybe someday. Life is never completely safe." Lydia squeezed his hand. "But we're together, and together we can face anything." The house repairs took longer, but by late spring, the bullet holes were patched, new windows installed, and fresh paint covered the scars. It looked almost as if the attack had never happened. Almost, but not quite. Lydia still startled at unexpected noises. Jonas still checked the locks twice before bed, and Evan still sometimes woke screaming from nightmares of fire and gunfire. But they were healing, all three of them, slowly but surely. And then in early summer, Lydia discovered she was pregnant. She'd suspected for weeks, the nausea, the exhaustion, the tenderness. But she'd been afraid to hope, afraid to believe that life could give her something so precious after everything they'd endured. Doc Brennan confirmed it with a smile. "About 3 months along, I'd say. Baby should come in late November, early December." Lydia walked home in a daze, her hand pressed to her still flat stomach. A baby. A new life, conceived in the midst of chaos, growing despite everything. It felt like a miracle. She told Jonas that night after Evan had gone to bed. She'd planned a whole speech, but when it came down to it, all she could manage was, "I'm pregnant." Jonas went very still. "You're sure?" Doc Brennan confirmed it. 3 months. Due in December. For a long moment, Jonas just stared at her. Then his face crumpled and he pulled her into his arms, holding her with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby. Lydia, His voice broke. "After Sarah died, I never thought I'd feel this again. Joy. Hope. The feeling that the future might actually be worth living. Are you happy?" Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes shining. "You've given me everything, Lydia. A home, a family, a reason to keep fighting, and now a child. How could I be anything but grateful?" They told Evan the next morning. The boy's eyes went wide. "A baby? Really? Really?" Lydia confirmed. "You're going to be a big brother, or, well, technically a cousin, but—" "I'm going to be a big brother," Evan said firmly. "Because you're my mother now, even if we don't use that word." "Right?" Lydia's throat closed up. They'd never defined their relationship formally, had let it grow naturally without labels. But hearing Evan claim her as his mother made something inside her settle into place. "Right," she managed. "I'm your mother, and Honus is your father, and this baby is your sibling. We're a family." Evan threw his arms around her, and Lydia held him close. This boy who'd healed her heart as much as she'd healed his. The pregnancy was harder than Lydia expected. The heat of summer made her ill, and she spent most days feeling exhausted and queasy. But Jonas was endlessly patient, taking over her chores without complaint, bringing her water and cool cloths when the nausea got bad. And Evan was a revelation, reading to her when she was too tired to get out of bed, fetching things she needed, treating her with a gentle concern that made her heart ache. "He's practicing," Jonas said one evening, watching Evan carefully carry Lydia a cup of tea. "Learning how to be a big brother. He's going to be wonderful at it. He gets it from you, the gentleness, the care." Jonas settled beside her on the porch, taking her hand. Sarah was a good woman, but she wasn't soft, wasn't nurturing. Evan needed that, and you gave it to him. You gave it to both of us. Lydia leaned against his shoulder, watching the sunset over their land, their home, their future. I didn't give you anything you didn't give me first. Then we're even. No. Lydia turned to look at him. We're blessed. There's a difference. As autumn arrived, Lydia's pregnancy became obvious, and the women of Sweetwater began a campaign of determined kindness. They brought food, offered advice, and included Lydia in their gatherings with a warmth she'd never expected. Even Miriam Price, whose brother Vernon was in prison, made a grudging peace. She arrived one afternoon with a stack of baby blankets and a stiff apology. I was wrong about you, she said without preamble. Said cruel things, thought worse ones, but you've proven yourself a dozen times over. So I'm here to apologize and offer these blankets. My daughter made them. Lydia accepted both with grace. Thank you, Mrs. Price. That means more than you know. You're one of us now. That means something in these parts. Miriam hesitated, then added, and if you ever need anything, for you or the baby, you ask. We take care of our own. After she left, Lydia stood holding the blankets and crying happy tears. She'd spent so long as an outsider, first in Philadelphia society and then here in Montana. But somewhere along the way, without her noticing, she'd become part of this community. She belonged. The baby came early, in late November during the first snow of winter. Lydia woke at midnight with cramping that quickly intensified into real labor. Jonas sent Evan to fetch Doc Brennan while he stayed with Lydia, holding her hand and talking her through the contractions. You've got this, he kept saying. You're the strongest person I know. You can do this. Lydia wanted to tell him she wasn't strong at all, that she was terrified, that childbirth had killed her own mother, and what if the same thing happened to her? But the pain was too intense for words, so she gripped Jonas's hand and tried to breathe. Doc Brennan arrived as dawn was breaking, and Maggie came with him, practical, efficient Maggie, who delivered half the babies in the territory. All right, Lydia, Maggie said, rolling up her sleeves. Let's bring this baby into the world. The labor lasted all day. By evening, Lydia was exhausted and delirious with pain, convinced she was dying. But Jonas never left her side, and Maggie's steady competence kept her grounded. One more push, Doc Brennan said. Come on, Lydia, one more. Lydia gathered every ounce of strength she had left and pushed. And suddenly, miraculously, there was a baby crying, a lusty, angry sound that was the most beautiful thing she'd ever heard. It's a girl, Doc Brennan announced, placing the tiny, squalling bundle on Lydia's chest. Congratulations. Lydia looked down at her daughter, red-faced and furious and absolutely perfect, and felt her heart expand to a size she hadn't known was possible. Hi, baby, she whispered. Hi, sweet girl. We've been waiting for you. Jonas was crying unashamedly, his hand gentle on the baby's head. She's beautiful. She's perfect. Lydia, we have a daughter. They named her Grace Sarah Hale. Grace for the unexpected mercy that had brought them together, Sarah for the woman who'd come before. And when Evan was finally allowed in to meet his new sister, his face lit up with a joy that erased the last shadows from his eyes. She's so small, he breathed, carefully touching Grace's tiny hand. Her fingers curled around his, and Evan looked up with wonder. She's holding me. Lydia, she's holding my hand. That's because she knows you're her big brother, Lydia said, exhausted but happier than she'd ever been. She knows she's safe with you. That night, after everyone had left and the baby was sleeping in her cradle, Jonas and Lydia lay together in bed, listening to their daughter's soft breathing. I was thinking, Jonas said quietly, about how we got here, about that day you stepped off the train looking like death warmed over. Romantic, Lydia murmured. Let me finish. I was thinking that if someone had told me that this broken woman would become my wife, would save my ranch, would give me back my life and give me a daughter, I wouldn't have believed them, would have said it was impossible. But here we are, living the impossible, building a life from nothing. His arm tightened around her. You know what the best part is? What? This is just the beginning. We've got years ahead of us. Years of raising Grace and Evan, of working this land, of growing old together. Years of normal, boring, beautiful life. After everything we've been through, Lydia said, boring sounds like heaven. They fell asleep like that, tangled together, their baby daughter sleeping nearby, their son safe down the hall. A family pieced together from broken parts, stronger for having been broken. Outside, snow fell softly on the Montana prairie, covering everything in clean white silence. The barn stood solid and new. The house glowed with warm lamplight. And somewhere in the darkness, the cattle moved peacefully through their pastures, safe and protected. The Hale Ranch slept, and it was good. The years that followed were filled with the kind of mundane joys that Lydia had once thought were reserved for other people. Grace grew from a squalling infant into a curious toddler, then into a bright-eyed little girl who followed her father everywhere and adored her big brother with fierce devotion. Evan thrived, his nightmares gradually fading as security and love did their slow work. He excelled in his studies and talked about becoming a lawyer someday. "So I can protect people like Uncle Jonius protected us," he said. The ranch prospered. With Dalton gone and honest men running the bank, Jonas was able to secure fair loans for expansion. They bought more cattle, hired a ranch hand, and built a proper workshop to replace what had burned. The land yielded its bounty generously, and they wanted for nothing. And then, 2 years after Grace's birth, Lydia found herself pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first. Her body knew what to do, and the nausea passed quickly. By her 6th month, she was glowing with health, her belly round and her movements still confident. "Another girl?" Doc Brennan predicted. Mark my words. He was right. Rose Evelyn Hale arrived in late spring during a thunderstorm that shook the house. She came quickly. Lydia barely had time to get to bed before Rose decided she was ready to meet the world. "She's impatient," Jonas said, laughing and crying at the same time as he held his second daughter, just like her mother. This time, Grace got to meet her baby sister immediately, and the 2-year-old was entranced. "My baby," she kept saying, patting Rose's head with careful hands. "My baby sister." With 2 young daughters and a teenage son, the house was never quiet. It was exactly the chaos Jonas had wished for, and Lydia loved every exhausting minute of it. The sound of children's laughter replaced the echoes of gunfire. The smell of baking bread drove out the memories of smoke. They were healing, building, becoming. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Jonas surprised Lydia with a gift. She opened the small box to find a beautiful locket on a delicate chain. "Open it," he urged. Inside were 2 tiny photographs, one of Grace, one of Rose, and somehow a third of Evan, all impossibly small and perfect. "Jonas, this is—" Lydia's voice broke. "How did you—" "Sent away for them. Cost a fortune, but worth it." He fastened the locket around her neck. "So you can carry them with you always. Our family." "Our family," Lydia repeated, touching the locket. Then she pulled out a package of her own. "I have something for you too." Jonas unwrapped it to find a quilt, not a simple one, but an elaborate creation with squares representing their journey. The train platform where they met. The ranch house. The barn burning and then rebuilt. Their wedding day. Each child's birth. All of it stitched together with threads of every color, creating something beautiful from disparate pieces. "Lydia." Jonas traced the images with gentle fingers. It's our story." Our story," she agreed. "Every broken piece stitched together. Every hard moment leading to something better. I wanted you to see what I see, that nothing was wasted, not the pain, not the fear, not even the worst moments. They all led us here." Jonas pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I love you. God, Lydia, I love you so much." "I love you too. Always." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other while their children played in the next room and the Montana sun streamed through the windows. Outside, their land stretched away in all directions, land they'd fought for, bled for, nearly died for. Land that was theirs, now and forever. 10 years after Lydia stumbled off that train in Sweetwater, Jonas took her to the hill overlooking their ranch. The same hill where he'd proposed, where they'd stood so many times watching their land, their life, their legacy. "Look at it," he said, his arm around her waist. "Just look." Lydia looked. The ranch had grown. More buildings now, more cattle, fields of grain waving in the breeze. Evan was visible in the distance, now a young man of 18 teaching Grace and Rose how to rope a fence post. Their daughter's laughter carried on the wind. "You did this," Jonas said. "You took a broken ranch and a broken man and a broken boy, and you stitched us back together. You built this." "We built this," Lydia corrected. "Together." "Together," Jonas agreed. He turned her to face him, his blue eyes as intense as they'd been the day they married. "Do you remember what you said that day in the kitchen when you told me you were staying? You said you were done running, that you wanted to build a future." "I remember." "Look at what we've built, Lydia. Look at our children, healthy, happy, safe. Look at our land, thriving. Look at us, still standing after everything." His voice grew thick. "You didn't just rebuild my life. You built something entirely new, something better than I ever dreamed possible." Lydia's eyes stung with tears. "So did you. You gave me a home when I had nothing. You gave me safety when I knew only fear. You gave me love when I thought I'd never trust again." She cupped his face in her hands. "You gave me everything, Jonas Hale. Then we're even." "No." Lydia smiled through her tears. "We're blessed. There's a difference." They kissed there on that hill, two people who'd found each other in the darkest times and built something luminous from the wreckage. Below them, their children played. Around them, their land prospered. And ahead of them stretched years of life together, years that would hold joy and sorrow, triumph and loss, all the messy, beautiful reality of being human. But they would face it all together, this family stitched from broken pieces. And that made them unbreakable. As they walked back down the hill, hand in hand, Lydia thought about the woman she'd been, hollow-eyed, desperate, convinced her life was over. That woman couldn't have imagined this future, couldn't have dreamed that so much happiness was waiting just beyond the next horizon. But that woman had been brave enough to keep walking, to step off that train into uncertainty, to accept help when it was offered, to fight when fighting was needed, to love when love seemed impossible. And because of that bravery, that stubborn, desperate, beautiful bravery, she'd found her way home. Not to a place, though the ranch was dear to her. Not to a building, though the house was filled with love. But to people. To Jonas and Evan and Grace and Rose. To neighbors who'd become friends and friends who'd become family. She'd found her way home to herself. To the woman she was meant to be. Strong, but gentle. Fierce, but kind. Scarred, but healing. And standing there with her husband's hand in hers, and her children's laughter in her ears, and the Montana sun warm on her face, Lydia Hale knew with absolute certainty that every hard step of her journey had been worth it. Every single one. Because they'd led her here. To this moment. To this life. To this love that would last until the end of her days and echo long after. The woman who arrived with nothing had created a dynasty of love. The man who lost everything had found the courage to hope again. And together, they'd built a family story strong enough to last for generations, stitched together like Lydia's quilt, piece by piece, heart by heart. This was their happy ending. But more than that, it was their happy beginning, the start of a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And that was the greatest gift of all. The years continued to unfold with a gentleness that still sometimes took Lydia by surprise. She'd spent so much of her life bracing for the next disaster that peaceful days felt almost suspicious, as if happiness were a trick that would be snatched away the moment she relaxed her guard. But Jonas noticed. He always noticed. "You're doing it again," he said one morning, finding her at the kitchen window, watching storm clouds gather on the horizon. "Doing what?" "Waiting for something bad to happen." He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "The storm's just a storm, Lydia. Not an omen, not a warning, just weather." "I know." But her hands were tight on the windowsill. "I can't help it. Every time things are good, really good, I start expecting it all to fall apart. It won't. We've already survived the worst. Everything else is just life." He kissed her temple. "Besides, we've got a strong barn, a solid house, and enough food stored to weather any storm, literal or otherwise." Lydia turned in his arms to face him. Jonas was graying at the temples now, lines deepening around his eyes, but he'd never looked more handsome to her. 10 years of peace had softened something in him, allowed the man underneath the armor to finally breathe. When did you get so wise? She asked. The day a stubborn woman in rags taught me that broken things could be mended. He kissed her properly, and Lydia felt the familiar warmth bloom in her chest. After all these years, his kiss still made her heart race. The storm that day turned out to be nothing, just rain and wind that passed by supper time. But Jonas's words stayed with Lydia, and she found herself consciously trying to let go of that old vigilance, to trust that happiness wasn't a temporary condition, but something she was allowed to keep. It helped that their children were thriving in ways that felt almost miraculous. Evan, now 20 years old, had indeed pursued law. He'd studied with Mr. Marsh for 2 years, then passed the territorial bar exam with the highest marks anyone had seen. Now he was establishing his own practice in Sweetwater, taking on cases that the bigger firms wouldn't touch, defending ranchers against predatory lenders, helping widows keep their land, ensuring the kind of justice Judge Morrison had shown them. I'm representing the Kowalskis next week, he told them over Sunday dinner. Remember them? Their farm's being threatened by the railroad. Companies trying to claim eminent domain, but the route they're proposing would destroy the Kowalskis' water access. Can you win? Jonas asked. I can try, and if I can't, at least they'll know someone fought for them. Evan's jaw set in that stubborn line Lydia recognized. She'd seen it in the mirror often enough. Nobody should have to face corruption alone. Not like we almost did. Grace, now 12, was showing signs of becoming a formidable woman in her own right. She had Jonas's stubbornness and Lydia's fierce protective streak, combined with a natural talent for managing the ranch that sometimes surprised even her father. Papa, we need to separate the yearlings this week, she announced, barging into the house with muddy boots and determined eyes. That spotted bull's getting aggressive, and if we don't move him soon, someone's going to get hurt. I'll handle it tomorrow, Jonas promised. I can do it. Let me do it. Jonas exchanged glances with Lydia, who just smiled. They'd learned that telling Grace she couldn't do something was the surest way to make her prove she could. All right, but take Charlie with you, and if that bull gives you any trouble, I'll rope him myself, Grace said confidently. I've been practicing. She had been practicing. Lydia had watched her daughter spend hours perfecting her throw, determined to be as good as any ranch hand. Grace had no interest in embroidery or fine dresses or any of the things Sweetwater's other girls seemed to value. She wanted to ride and rope and run the ranch someday, and neither Jonas nor Lydia saw any reason to stop her. Rose, at 10, was different, quieter, more contemplative. She loved reading and drawing, and she'd recently discovered a passion for botany that had her cataloging every plant on the ranch. She reminded Lydia painfully of Evan at that age, all careful observation and gentle intelligence. Mama, did you know we have 14 different species of wildflowers in the North Pasture alone? Rose asked one evening, showing Lydia her carefully pressed specimens. And 3 of them are used for medicine, Mrs. Henderson told me. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Are you going to keep studying them? I want to learn everything. Maybe I could be a doctor someday. Or a botanist, or both. Rose's eyes shone with possibility. Evan says there's going to be a university in Helena soon, says women can attend if they're serious about learning. Would you want that? To go away to university? Rose considered this carefully. Maybe, but I'd always come home. This is where I belong. This is where I belong. Lydia heard those words from all 3 of her children in different ways, and each time they made her heart swell with gratitude. They'd built something here, not just a ranch, but a home that called its children back. A legacy that would outlast them. But legacy, Lydia was learning, came with its own challenges. The trouble started innocuously enough. Tom Henderson stopped by one afternoon with the news that developers from back east were buying up land around Sweetwater. They wanted to bring the railroad through, establish new towns, modernize the territory. Some folks are excited, Tom said, accepting coffee from Lydia. Thinking about what the railroad could mean, easier shipping, better prices for cattle, connection to the rest of the country. But you're not excited, Jonas observed. I'm cautious. These developers don't care about existing ranches or the people who've worked this land for years. They see dollar signs and opportunity, and they've got the law on their side, territorial development codes, right-of-way statutes, all sorts of legal tricks to force people out. Tom's expression was grim. Already the Martins sold their place. The Johnsons are considering it, and the developers have been asking questions about your spread. Let them ask, Jonas said. This land isn't for sale. But the developers were persistent. Over the next months, representatives came by regularly, each time increasing their offer. The numbers grew astronomical, more money than Jonas would make from ranching in a lifetime, enough to set up his children for generations, to ensure none of them would ever struggle the way he and Lydia had. Just think about it, the latest representative urged. He was a slick man in an expensive suit, out of place in their simple kitchen. $20,000. That's generational wealth, Mr. Hale. You could move anywhere, do anything. Your children could have opportunities you never dreamed of. My children have everything they need right here, Jonas said flatly. The answer's no. After the man left, Lydia found Jonas in the barn, staring at nothing. You're thinking about it, she said softly. Of course I'm thinking about it. $20,000, Lydia. Do you know what we could do with that money? I know what we'd lose, our home, our history, everything we fought for. But what about their futures? Jonas gestured toward the house, where their children were. Grace wants to run a ranch, but what if ranching becomes impossible? What if the railroad comes through anyway and devalues the land? Evan's building a career, but Rose might want university. That costs money. We'll find the money if she needs it, the same way we found everything else, by working for it together. Is that fair, though? Making them struggle when we have the means to make things easier? Lydia moved closer, taking his hands. Jonas Hale, look at me. What did this land teach you? That I'm stubborn as hell? That you're capable of surviving anything? That you're strong enough to rebuild from nothing? That you're worth more than any amount of money? She squeezed his hands. If we take that easy money, what do we teach our children? That you can buy your way out of hard things? That land and legacy matter less than comfort? That's not who we are. Jonas was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. You're right. Of course, you're right. I want to give them everything. You already have. You've given them a home, roots, a sense of who they are and where they come from. You can't buy those things, Jonas. You can only build them, one day at a time, the way we built this life. When did you become the wise one? The day a stubborn man in a broken barn taught me that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. They turned down the $20,000, and then the $25,000, and finally the $30,000, which was accompanied by thinly veiled threats about eminent domain and forced sales. We'll fight it, Evan said grimly, reviewing the developer's latest letters. They can't just take your land without just compensation, and even then they need to prove public necessity. I'll take this all the way to the Territorial Supreme Court if I have to. But fighting took its toll. The legal battles dragged on through spring and summer. Other ranchers were selling, tired of the pressure, seduced by the money. The developers grew more aggressive, filing frivolous complaints, challenging property boundaries, making life difficult in a dozen small ways. And then, in late August, catastrophe struck from an unexpected direction. Fire season had always been a danger in Montana, but that year was particularly dry. Lightning storms swept through without rain, igniting spot fires across the territory. Jonas and the neighboring ranchers spent weeks fighting blazes, exhausted and soot-stained, saving what they could. But nature was relentless. A massive fire started in the mountains and raced down toward the valley, pushed by high winds, consuming everything in its path. Within hours, it was bearing down on a cluster of ranches, including the Hale property. We have to evacuate, Jonas said, his face streaked with ash. The fire break won't hold. This thing's too big. Oh, what about the cattle? Grace asked, her voice panicked. We'll drive them to the river, hope they survive. But the house, the barn. Jonas's voice broke. We can't save it all. Lydia looked at the home they'd built, the place where she'd learned to be happy, where she'd raised her children, where every corner held a memory. The thought of losing it tore at her heart. But then she looked at Jonas, at her children, at the neighbors who'd come to help, and she realized something fundamental. It's just wood and nails, she said. As long as we have each other, we can rebuild. They worked through the night, driving cattle, loading wagons with what possessions they could save, photographs, documents, the quilt Lydia had made. Grace wanted to go back for her roping practice dummy. Rose wept over leaving her pressed flowers. Evan stood watching the advancing fire with the analytical gaze of someone already planning the legal strategy to rebuild. And Jonas held Lydia's hand as they watched the smoke obscure the stars and said quietly, "We'll survive this, like we've survived everything else." The fire swept through just before dawn. Lydia watched from the Henderson Ranch, 2 miles away, as flames consumed the horizon. She couldn't see her home specifically, couldn't know if it still stood or if everything they'd built had turned to ash. She thought about that day she'd stepped off the train, how she'd had nothing then and was facing nothing now. The symmetry would have been funny if it hadn't hurt so much. Grace pressed against her side, silent tears running down her cheeks. Rose clutched her rescued flower journal like a lifeline. Evan stood with his arm around both his sisters, his jaw tight with suppressed emotion. And Jonas stood apart, staring at the orange glow on the horizon, his fists clenched, his shoulders rigid with the weight of everything he couldn't fix. Lydia went to him, wrapping her arms around him from behind, pressing her face between his shoulder blades. "We'll survive this," she whispered, throwing his own words back at him. "Like we've survived everything else. What if there's nothing left? Then we start over. We've done it before." "I'm tired, Lydia. I'm so damn tired of starting over." "I know, but we won't do it alone. Look!" She turned him to face the scene behind them. The yard was full of neighbors, every ranching family within 50 miles, it seemed. They'd come to offer shelter, food, support. Maggie Crowder was organizing sleeping arrangements. Tom Henderson was taking inventory of supplies. Families were sharing what little they'd saved, making sure no one went without. "We're not alone," Lydia said. "We never have been. Not since that first day when these people showed up at our wedding and proved we belonged. They're our family too, Jonas, and family doesn't let each other face catastrophe alone." The fire burned for 3 days. When it finally passed, the smoke cleared to reveal a landscape transformed. Whole swaths of prairie had been reduced to black char. Structures that had stood for generations were now just ash and memory. But the Hale Ranch, by some miracle of wind patterns and fire breaks and sheer stubborn luck, still stood. The barn was gone, reduced to a smoking foundation. The workshop was destroyed. Half the fencing had burned. The cattle had scattered, and it would take weeks to round them up. But the house, their beautiful, bulletproof, rebuilt from dreams house, stood intact. Smoke damaged and singed around the edges, but standing. Lydia stood in the yard and wept. Not tears of grief, but of overwhelming gratitude. They'd lost so much, but they'd kept the essentials. They could rebuild. Again. "It's still here," Grace whispered, wonder in her voice. "Our home is still here." "Because it was meant to be here," Jonas said. He pulled his entire family into his arms, Lydia, Evan, Grace, Rose, and held them while the ash still drifted down like snow. "This is our land, our legacy, and nothing, not fire, not developers, not anything, is taking it from us." The rebuilding began immediately. Every rancher who'd lost their barn raised a new one for someone else first. It was an unspoken code. Take care of your neighbor before yourself, because when your turn came, they'd do the same. The Hale barn went up in record time, a community effort that saw families working side by side from dawn to dusk. Evan worked as hard as any ranch hand, his lawyer's soft hands blistering and bleeding. Grace directed traffic like a general, her organizational skills putting grown men to shame. Rose made sure everyone was fed and watered, moving through the workers with quiet efficiency. And Lydia and Jonas worked together the way they always had, in sync, anticipating each other's needs, partners in every sense. When the barn was finished, Jonas stood in the center of it and looked around at the faces gathered there. Friends, neighbors, family. "I don't have words for what this means," he said, his voice rough. "What you've all done. It's what we do," Maggie interrupted. "This is Montana. We take care of our own." Still, Jonas reached for Lydia's hand. "My wife and I came to this land with nothing. We nearly lost everything multiple times. And every time you all were there. You showed up. You fought beside us. You proved that home isn't just land, it's people. It's community. It's the knowledge that when you fall, someone will be there to help you up." He paused, emotion thickening his voice. "So I'm making a promise right now. This land, every acre of it, will stay in the Hale family for generations. We'll never sell, not to developers or anyone else. This will be a working ranch, a place that honors the life we've all built here, for as long as a Hale draws breath. That's my vow to you all, and to this land that's given us so much. The declaration was met with solemn nods and a few emotional comments. These were people who understood what land meant, what legacy required. They'd all made similar vows in their own ways. That night, alone in their smoke-scented bedroom, Jonas held Lydia close and said, "Do you think I'm crazy? Turning down all that money, making dramatic promises about eternal legacies?" "I think you're exactly who I thought you were the day I met you," Lydia said. "A man of absolute integrity, a man who keeps his promises, a man who understands that some things matter more than money. I just want our children to have easier lives than we did. They will, because they'll have something we didn't have for so long. They'll have a place they belong, roots that go deep enough to weather any storm. That's worth more than any developer's check." "You sure about that?" "I've never been more sure of anything." Jonas kissed her then, and Lydia tasted ash and promise and the particular flavor of love that had survived everything. They'd rebuilt their barn, would rebuild their fences and workshop and everything else the fire had taken. But the essential things, their love, their family, their home, those had never been in danger of burning. Those were fireproof. The developers made one final attempt in October. Their representative arrived with a new strategy, threats about environmental violations, suggestions that the fire had been deliberately set by ranchers trying to maintain control, hints that Evan's law practice might face scrutiny if Jonas continued to be difficult. Jonas listened in silence until the man finished his thinly veiled intimidation. Then he stood, all 6'3" of controlled fury. "Get off my land," he said quietly. "Mr. Hale, you're being unreasonable. I said get off my land. And tell your bosses that if they send anyone else to threaten my family, they'll be facing federal charges for extortion. My son is a lawyer, my neighbors include 3 county officials and a retired territorial judge, and we have very long memories about people who try to steal what's ours." The representative left quickly, and true to Jonas's word, the developers never came back. Word spread that the Hale Ranch was untouchable, that Jonas Hale and his family were not people you wanted to cross. The railroad eventually came through, but it took a route that avoided the established ranches, respecting the boundaries of people who'd proven they wouldn't be moved. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. Different from before the fire, but good in its own way. The ranch grew and prospered, Evan's law practice thrived, and he began taking on cases across the territory, always coming home between trials. Grace took on more and more responsibility for the cattle operation, proving herself capable beyond her years. And Rose, sweet contemplative Rose, got her wish. She was accepted to the new university in Helena to study botany and medicine. "I'll come home every summer," she promised, hugging Lydia tight. "I'll bring back everything I learn, and maybe someday I can be the doctor this area needs." "We're so proud of you," Lydia said, fighting tears. "So proud of all of you." "We learned from the best," Rose said simply. "You and Papa taught us that anything worth having is worth fighting for. That family is forever. That home is where your heart refuses to leave." After Rose left for university, the house felt emptier but not lonely. Evan still came for Sunday dinners. Grace was always underfoot, tracking mud and ambition through the kitchen. And Jonas and Lydia had each other, which had always been enough. They were sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, when Jonas said, "Do you ever regret it? The life we've had?" "Regret?" Lydia turned to look at him, genuinely surprised. "Why would I regret the best thing that ever happened to me? It's been hard, harder than most people's lives. The fighting, the fires, the constant struggle. And also more beautiful than most people's lives. The love, the growth, the knowledge that we built something real." Lydia took his hand, studying the calluses and scars that matched her own. "Jonas, I stepped off that train with nothing. I was broken and afraid and convinced my life was over. And you gave me everything. A home, a family, a purpose, the chance to become someone I actually liked. How could I possibly regret any of it? Even the hard parts? Especially the hard parts. They taught me I was stronger than I knew. They showed me what love really means. Not just romance and passion, but partnership and perseverance. Choosing each other every day, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. Jonas was quiet for a moment. Then, I was so angry when Sarah died. Angry at God, at fate, at the unfairness of it all. I thought my life was over. Thought I'd never feel anything but grief and obligation. And now? Now I understand that life isn't about avoiding pain. It's about what you build in spite of the pain. Sarah's death was terrible, but it led me to you. Marcus Dalton tried to destroy us, but fighting him made us stronger. The fire took our barn, but rebuilding it brought our community closer. He squeezed her hand. Every hard thing led somewhere better. Every loss revealed something worth finding. That's wisdom talking. That's age talking. I'm getting old, Lydia. We both are. And it's glorious. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars emerged. Inside, they could hear Grace moving around, probably going over the ranch accounts one more time. In the distance, cattle lowed softly. The land breathed around them, alive and eternal. What do you think happens to this place after we're gone? Jonas asked eventually. Grace will run it. She'll marry someday, probably to someone as stubborn as she is, and they'll have children who'll run it after them. Evan will practice law in Sweetwater until he's old and cranky, and he'll make sure every rancher in the territory gets fair treatment. Rose will come back after university, maybe not to ranch, but to be the doctor she wants to be. She'll heal people the way we healed each other. You've got it all figured out. I've got it all hoped out. There's a difference. Lydia rested her head on Jonas's shoulder. But whatever actually happens, I know this. We built something that matters. Not just a ranch, but a family legacy of fighting for what's right, of protecting what's yours, of helping those who need it. That doesn't die with us. It lives on in our children and their children and everyone who remembers the story of how we got here. The story of a woman in rags and a broken widower. The story of two people who refused to give up, who found each other in the darkness and built a light that won't go out. Lydia lifted her head to look at him. That's not a bad legacy, Jonas Hale. It's not a bad legacy at all, Lydia Hale. The years continued to pass, as they do. Rose graduated from university and returned to open a medical practice in Sweetwater, just as Lydia had predicted. She married a fellow doctor, a kind man who loved Montana as much as she did, and they built a small hospital that served the entire region. Evan became one of the most respected lawyers in the territory, known for his integrity and his fierce protection of the vulnerable. He never married, but he adopted 2 orphaned siblings after their parents died, proving that family was always about choice, not just blood. And Grace, fierce, determined Grace, took over the ranch when Jonas's knees finally gave out, and he had to admit he couldn't do the physical work anymore. She expanded the operation, pioneered new breeding techniques, and became known throughout Montana as one of the finest ranchers in the territory. She married late to a cowboy from Wyoming who was brave enough to love a woman who'd never be content to stay in the house. They gave Jonas and Lydia 6 grandchildren, each one a miracle. Jonas and Lydia aged together, their bodies slowing but their love deepening with each passing year. They became the family elders, the ones everyone came to for advice and stories and the particular wisdom that comes from surviving impossible things. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration. Every rancher within 100 miles came, along with townspeople, former clients of Evans, and patients of Rose's. The barn, rebuilt twice now, was decorated with wildflowers and lanterns. There was music and dancing and so much food that Lydia worried they'd collapse the tables. "Look at what you've built," Maggie said, elderly now, but still sharp-eyed. "A quarter century ago, you were a woman with nothing. Now look around, all these people, all this love. That's your legacy, Lydia." "It's our legacy," Lydia corrected, gesturing to include everyone. "None of this would exist without all of you, without the community that caught us when we fell." "And kept catching you," Maggie said with a smile. "Multiple times, if memory serves." "Multiple times," Lydia agreed, laughing. "We weren't very good at staying upright in the early days. But you never stopped trying. That's what mattered." Jonas found Lydia later in the evening, standing apart from the crowd, looking out at the land they'd fought so hard to keep. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, slipping his arm around her waist. "I was thinking about that first day. when I stepped off the train and thought I'd made the biggest mistake of my life coming here. And now? Now I know it was the best decision I ever made. Every hard step, every terrifying moment, every time I wanted to give up but didn't, they all led me here. To you, to this family, to this impossible, beautiful life. Jonas pulled her close, and they swayed gently to the music drifting from the barn. Around them, their children and grandchildren danced and laughed. Above them, Montana stars blazed in infinite patterns. Below them, the land they defended held firm. "I love you," Jonas said. "Have I told you that recently?" "Only about 1,000 times, but I never get tired of hearing it." "Good, because I plan to keep saying it for whatever time we have left." "Which will be decades," Lydia said firmly. "I refuse to let you die before we're at least 90. Is that an order? That's a requirement. We survived too much to not get a long, boring old age together." They danced under the stars, two people who'd found each other in darkness and built a dynasty of light. Behind them, the party continued, their legacy made flesh, their love made manifest in every grandchild's laugh and every neighbor's smile. The years ahead would bring more joys and sorrows, as life always does. They would bury friends and welcome great-grandchildren. They would watch Montana transform around them while their land stayed constant. They would grow old in each other's arms, two trees that had grown together until their roots were inseparably tangled. And eventually, many years later, they would be laid to rest on the hill overlooking their ranch, side by side under a single headstone that read simply, "Jonas and Lydia Hale. They built something beautiful." But that ending was still far away. For now they danced in the barn they'd rebuilt twice, surrounded by love they'd earned through fire and fear and unwavering faith in each other. Grace watched them from across the barn, her own husband's arm around her waist, and said quietly, "I want that, what they have, love that lasts forever." "You've got it," her husband assured her. "We're building it right now, same way they did. One day at a time, one choice at a time." Rose, dancing nearby with her own family, felt tears prick her eyes watching her parents. "They saved each other," she murmured to her husband. "Two broken people who put each other back together." "That's what love is," he replied. "Not finding someone perfect, but finding someone worth fighting for, worth rebuilding for, worth everything for." Evan, sitting with his adopted children, pointed to Jonas and Lydia. "See them? That's what I want you to remember. That's what family looks like, not perfect, not easy, but real. Built on choice and commitment and refusing to give up, even when giving up would be easier." "Did they really almost lose everything?" his daughter asked. "Multiple times. But they had each other, and they had this community, and they had the stubborn belief that some things are worth any cost to protect. That's how they built this legacy, the one you're inheriting, the one you'll pass down someday to your own children." As midnight approached and the celebration began to wind down, Jonas and Lydia slipped away to their familiar spot on the porch. They sat in the chairs they'd occupied thousands of times over the years, holding hands in comfortable silence. "We did it," Lydia said eventually. "We actually did it. We built a life worth living. We did more than that. We built a family worth being part of, a community worth belonging to, a legacy worth leaving behind." Jonas brought her hand to his lips. "You know what the best part is?" "What?" "I'd do it all again. Every hard moment, every terrifying choice, every time we nearly lost everything. I'd do it all exactly the same, because it led me to you. It led me to this." Lydia's eyes filled with tears. "You old romantic." "Only for you, only ever for you." They sat until the last guest had departed, and the barn was dark and silent, until their children had rounded up sleepy grandchildren and headed to their own homes, until there was nothing but the two of them and the Montana night and the land that had become as much a part of them as their own heartbeats. "Ready for bed?" Jonas asked eventually. "Ready for whatever comes next," Lydia replied, "as long as you're there." "Always," Jonas promised. "For whatever time we have left, I'm right here beside you." They walked into the house hand in hand, these two people who'd found each other in the rubble of their broken lives and built something unbreakable from the pieces. Behind them, the ranch slept peacefully. Around them, the family they'd created spread out like roots through the Montana soil, deep and strong and permanent. and ahead of them stretched whatever years remained to be filled with grandchildren and harvests and the quiet joys of a life well lived. There would be no more dramatic battles, no more life or death struggles. Just the gentle accumulation of days spent together, each one a gift they'd earned through courage and faith and love that refused to quit. It wasn't the ending Lydia had imagined that day she stepped off the train in Sweetwater. It was better. Because she'd learned that endings were just new beginnings in disguise, that losing everything could lead to gaining more than you'd ever dreamed, that the woman you became in the fire was stronger and wiser and more beautiful than the woman you'd been before. She'd learned that home wasn't a place but a person, the one whose hand you reached for in the darkness, whose strength became yours when your own failed, whose love was constant as the North Star. She'd learned that family was built, not born, that legacies were earned through daily choices, not grand gestures, that happiness wasn't the absence of struggle, but the presence of people worth struggling for. And most importantly, she'd learned that it was never too late to start over, never too late to choose hope over despair, love over fear, building over breaking. That as long as you had breath and will and someone who believed in you, you could create miracles from nothing. That was the story Lydia would tell her great-grandchildren someday, when they were old enough to understand. The story of a woman in rags who became a woman in silk, of a broken man who learned to hope again, of a traumatized boy who grew into a force for justice, of two little girls who watched their parents build something impossible and learned they could do the same. It was a story about Montana and ranching and the American West. But more than that, it was a story about the human heart, its capacity for resilience, for transformation, for loving even when love seemed impossible. It was a story about how we save each other, one small act of courage at a time. And as Lydia drifted off to sleep that night, safe in Jonas's arms, in the house they'd defended and rebuilt, on the land they'd refused to surrender, she felt nothing but gratitude for every step that had led her here. For the train ride west, for the collapse that brought Jonas running, for the contract that became a courtship, for the love that became a marriage, for the battles that became victories, for the ashes that became foundation stones, for all of it. Because every moment, the beautiful and the terrible, the triumphant and the devastating, had been necessary. Every choice had mattered, every act of courage had counted. And in the end, they'd built something that would outlast them both, something strong enough to weather any storm, something beautiful enough to make even the darkest days worthwhile. They'd built a home. They'd built a family. They'd built a legacy of love that would echo through generations, reminding their descendants that broken things could be mended, that lost people could be found, that even in the darkest moments, hope remained. That was their gift to the future. That was their story, complete at last. And it was perfect.